we've had a couple of forums. So we had our first forum back in April of 2022, and then our second forum in July of 2022. It's kind of ironic that I'm doing this because I actually wasn't there in July. I was getting married, which is the only legitimate reason for missing one of our forums. I guess having a child would also be a legitimate reason. But there, in that forum, we had a lot of really good participation. We had participation from local government, federal government, provincial government, First Nations, and in that forum, the participants agreed to the 5 principles for working together for flood resilience, which we have on your tables so you can take a look at them. So in these are capturing some of that spirit of working together to make sure no one's left out and looking after the values that we all share. In that meeting, we also had a shared interest in moving to action. So moving to that next step, agreeing that we want to work together and wanting to take the next step towards acting on resilience. And what has happened since? Well, we've really taken that decision and ran with it in the background. So there's been quite a few things happening, both at the government level and across the Lower Mainland. Lots of work towards resilience. We have a new ministry and a new minister. Thank you again, Minister Ma, for being here. Very exciting. We've also had quite a bit of exciting things happening with the technical team here at Lower Fraser Fisheries Coalition. So that is, the team has been analyzing opportunities for growth towards resilience. And we wanted to come together today to reconvene and reaffirm that interest in working together and trying to explore some of what these actions might look like. So as Tyrone was saying, to really build something together. So that's part of why you're here today. Okay, next slide. There we go. So as I said, I'm representing the Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition. So we have quite a few. I think Tyrone called us brilliant just a second ago, which is very flattering. Thank you. Bunch of brilliant organizations coming together and working. We got together quite quickly after the floods of 2021, acknowledging that a lot of recovery was building back the same and not necessarily better. And that we should be using this as an opportunity to reevaluate the risk in our area and how we can reduce risk going forward, since we can expect the same event or a worse event in about 20 years. So let's take the opportunity to do it right. So we had these number of groups come together, and we support the Lower Mainland in a number of different ways moving towards resilience. And those are, next slide, please, through convening. So by providing space like this to talk about how resilience can work in communities and in the region. We also recently, besides our forums, we had a Farmers and First Nations specific forum, which was a really magical gathering. It was the brainchild of Dave Zender, and a really exciting time to understand how farmers are an essential part of the equation. Like we're saying, we don't want anyone to be left out, and farmers are a big part of our land base. And so having them come to the table and talk about flood management and understanding how we can bring them into the fold was a really successful event for us and really exciting. We also catalyze, so we support communities with their resilience-driven projects. And finally, we advocate. So we work with the province and the federal government on trying to understand where are the opportunities for growth, again, both in policy, funding, and other things like that. All right, I think I pass it over to Erica now. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Amazing to look out and see a full room. Wonderful to have you all here. I'm just curious how many people were here. It was about a year ago, July last year, for the previous forum that we had. Yeah, so a few folks coming back and then a lot of new faces. I know there's been elections in the meantime, ministries coming and going and so on. So thank you for finding your way here. And we're really looking forward to the conversations today. My name's Erica Crawford. I'm with Shift Collaborative, and I'm just kind of orchestrating things here today. So I'll just be here from time to time, giving you instructions on where to go and how to proceed so that we can have some good, productive conversations today. And I should have been joined by my colleague, Jay Hope, who I think a number of you in the room would know through his good work with the communities in this region. He's unfortunately not able to be with us today due to a family emergency, and he asked that I convey his regrets, and I also just wanted to let you know that he has had an important part in shaping this day as well, and so we'll do our best to carry this in the spirit that he had brought to the work as well. So sorry to not have him here with us today. Curious who we do have in the room. So I just thought we could do some hands to get a sense of who's shown up here today. If you're from a First Nation community, could you put up your hand? So we've got folks from across the mainland Coast Salish communities. Wonderful. Great to see so many people here today, a few familiar faces as well. How about local governments or regional government? Yeah, quite a few as well. I'm noticing folks putting up their hands in all at the same places. So we're going to get you mixed up here as we go along. And provincial and federal government, who's here from either the provincial or federal? Yeah, great. Oh, look at you. You're spread out through the rooms. Isn't that great? All right. And anyone, other organizations, folks that are here from other organizations. All right. Excellent. So, oh, and farmers. Yes, farmers. Amazing. Okay. Great. Yes, wonderful. Thank you for joining us. A very important part of the conversation, as has already been said. Just also wanted to let you know who is here in the room to support you as we go along. We have a large crew of folks who you might have seen running around helping to set things up this morning. We've got a facilitator at each table. If you could just put up your hand. So when we go into the discussions at your tables, there's 12 tables that are set up for the discussions. You'll have a facilitator at your table. And then the note takers as well, we have one note taker at each table. So just to let you know that in your discussions, we'll be gathering what you share in multiple ways. And this is a really central part of today, is really to hear from everyone in the room, to hear the diversity of perspectives, to have that opportunity to share, to listen to one another, to challenge one another, to be challenged by the people around us as well. And hopefully we'll all walk away from today changed in some way. And we will be documenting that as we go and putting together a report as we did last year as well, to reflect back what has happened here today and as a support to the work that will be ongoing after this forum as well. Also wanted to just point out there's also various other folks around who are here to support you, performing different roles throughout the day. We have little stickers, dot stickers on our name tags. So if you're looking for help, just find someone with a sticker on their name tag and hopefully they can point you in the right direction. And I also just wanted the folks from the Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition, if you could just put up your hands for a second as well, just so folks know. This is the group that has been working tirelessly to pull this together, as well as a whole bunch of other work in moving this forward. So just want you to also know that there's a big team behind this, and to acknowledge them for all the great work that they're doing. We also have with us today Michelle, who is over here, and I just want to invite Michelle up to introduce herself. She's going to be doing graphic recording, and she'll just share a little bit about what that's going to look like.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to quickly introduce myself and let you know what I'll be up to. So I'll be moving around the room. My name is Michelle Buchholz. I'm Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan. And I've been a guest on Coast Salish territories for about 12 years. And so I'm happy to join you again. I was at your forum last year in July. And what I'll be doing is moving around the tables, but also if you don't know what graphic recording is, it's not just one thing. It's done in many ways. And so the way that I practice is to treat myself as your witness. So similarly to in my territory or my nation lands, we have witnesses which we hire into our potlatch halls or our feast halls. And so that's how I use the process as your witness, who in our feast halls, if you're called upon, you could then say that business has been done. And that's how we govern ourselves. So that's a form of governance. And so this is a modern witnessing, as I'm using an iPad. But if you'd like to come and take a look or ask me any questions, I welcome that. It's supposed to be an engaging tool. So I thank the coalition for inviting me back again, and Sq'eq'eyl, everyone. I'll be sharing the visuals after our afternoon break.
So happy to have Michelle back. And if you saw the report from last year, the beautiful graphics with that, that was Michelle's beautiful work. And so we're looking forward to what comes of today as well, and having that way of sharing the story of the work that happens here today so that that can carry on beyond this time together. Next slide, please. So today we're working to identify the focus and priorities for a region-wide approach. That's the main purpose and goal of us coming together. And the secondary goal as well is that we're here to build those relationships, build those connections, the familiarity, and to build a shared understanding that can support us as we move forward and try to understand what those areas of focus and priorities should be, and also how we're going to make that happen. There's many layers to that, translating from ideas into how we work together and how we move this forward. And so those are kind of the two things that we're holding as objectives for today. And this is the script that we'll be following today. We're in the welcoming opening remarks part. We're going to have a little bit in a moment around setting the context and arriving here together as a room. And then before lunch, we're going to provide some orientation again to those 5 principles that we've been mentioning. For some, that will be familiar, hopefully, from last year or from reading things prior to this, but we'll share that so that everyone knows what we're talking about here. Should be pretty intuitive. And then use that as the basis for talking about what are the priorities that we hold as a region? What are the kinds of things that we can do better together than we can individually? So that's going to be the conversation before lunch. And then from that conversation, we're going to identify some key regional issues that we're then going to talk about after lunch and dig down into those. What would be some goals around those? How would we implement the 5 principles in each of these areas? And then at the end of the day, we'll get to many people's favorite conversation. What are we going to do? So thinking about, 10 years from now, where do we imagine ourselves being? And what are some of the steps, the actions that we can take to get there? So that's the flow of the day. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask your facilitator or come and find me. And next slide, please. So just wanted to ground ourselves, kind of gather us together in reflecting a little bit on how we are together here in this room. I keep talking about the work that's going to happen after this forum and coming out of this, but let's be honest in this sense too. This is the work, being here together, having these conversations. And so how we conduct ourselves, how we hold ourselves in these conversations, that matters. And this is what we're building this work together on the basis of. So I want to invite you to take this to heart and really to reflect on how we're showing up here today. First and foremost, always to practice confidentiality. So please, anything that's shared at your tables, we want to have an environment where people can feel free to share from their own experience the honest things that they have to say, maybe some of the things that might be challenging, might be hard to speak with others. We want to really create a space where people can do that. So please, anything shared by anyone else at your table, please don't share that beyond this room. You can share your own experience. You can share how you were touched, how something affected you, or what your experience was, but please don't share other people's stories or other people's experiences. Can we just get a sense, are people okay with that? Can we get a sense in the room of people's agreement to hold this in confidence today? Okay, thank you. All right. Also, of course, beginning with respect and curiosity goes alongside hand in hand with this, respecting each other's values, interests, and knowledge systems. We have a great diversity in the room today, so really being open, coming to this with an open mind and an open heart to really be open to listening to people, be open to being surprised, being open to seeing a side of someone that you didn't realize was there, and perhaps that there's some point of connection there. So really inviting you to come to the conversation this way and looking for common ground. Also, people have different comfort levels in how they show up, how much they might speak, how loudly they might speak. So also inviting everyone to kind of tend to this through the day. If you're someone who tends to speak up, speak loudly, step in, be aware of that and leave some space for others. If you're someone who tends to hold back, please know that your voice matters, what you have to share matters. And so please do come forward, and your facilitators at your table will also be bringing attention to that to help you to do that. On that note, I'm going to pick up on a suggestion from my friend Erica, wherever she is, the other Erica in the room, and noticing that it's very loud in here. I don't have the loudest voice. So when I'm calling you back to attention, because we're going to be moving on, I'm going to use this method. So I'm going to put my hand up. And when I put my hand up, just imagining there's a thread from the bottom of my chin to my hand. And if you could please join me when I do that. And if you hear me saying, please, please be quiet, we're going to move on. Just raise your hand and stop talking. And then hopefully that will bring a wave of silence through the room. And this will work perfectly and seamlessly and and not upset anyone at all. So that's the method that we're going to use. And so just be aware of that through the day. If you see someone with their hand up, that's what's going on. Please put your hand up and just bring your conversation to a close as quickly as possible. All right. So take care of your needs throughout the day. The bathrooms are over here through this door, as Darcy had shared already, and I'm so grateful to him for explaining the whole layout, because that was my challenge this morning, was trying to figure out how to tell you guys how to use the washrooms. It's a beautiful layout they've got back there, and I didn't find the dryer the first time, so that's so helpful to know. And one last thing is also to be aware today, the things that we're talking about more and more are very personal. There are a lot of people in this room who have direct experience with floods, with fires. There are fires burning not far from here right now, and people who are tending to supporting the wildfire response in this room today. There are people who are coming to this with a lot at stake. And so just also inviting everyone, and maybe we can do this together right now, to just take a breath when you need to take a breath. And also to be mindful of that at your tables. And if you notice that there's kind of something building at the table, if it's your turn to talk, if you're the facilitator, to invite your table actually to just take a moment and pause and invite everyone to take a breath together. So let's just do that together. So just breathe out and just take a deep breath in and allow it to go into your whole body. And just be reminded that that is always there for you. So if at any moment you need that through the day, come back to your breath. Feel free to take a pause. If you need to step away, you're welcome to. If you need any support, again, find someone with a sticker or someone else that you feel comfortable with, and feel free to just take a pause through the day. One last point, we have a couple of folks who are going to be taking photos during the day. Diane, who hopefully you met on your way in, will be running around with her camera, and then Roxana is right here. So you may see these folks running around taking photos. Again, if you saw the report, we had some beautiful, beautiful photos that really captured the feeling in the room last year. So that's what we're doing that for. And just a note that we didn't have photo release forms, but if you don't want to be in photos, please find Roxana or Diane or one of us and let us know, and we'll arrange to ensure that you're not shown in any of the photos. So please just let us know if that's the case. All right, I think that is it. And we're going to go next to welcoming Elder Wendy Ritchie to share with us, and Tyrone is going to give some words of introduction.
Thanks, Erica. We find there's out of the 3 million or so people in our backyard, so many people have no idea of who we are as Chilliwack or Sq'eq'o or Coast Salish peoples. But in that, we see that play out by when you don't know about us, there's a lot of ignorance there. There's a lot of bias and indifference, and there's always some racism in there. But I find that the more people hear a little bit about who we are and some of our values, some of our traditions, some of our connections to the land, it takes that ignorance away, and there's a bit of a deeper understanding and an acceptance of who we are as the people of the land, as the people of the river, as salmon people in this part of the river. So we thought we'd take a little bit of time, 25 minutes or so, to just for one of our elders, that's S.A.Y here, who is from Sq'eq'eyl here, is my sister, just to share a little bit about what it is that's on her mind. Here's an opportunity to educate all of those that you are in the room and those of you are online. And if you heard some of the stories before, it's great. You continue your learning. This is your first time hearing some of these stories. I really hope it resonates with you. Because the values that we put in and what you call traditional knowledge is sometimes traditional knowledge belittles what it is that elders like S.A.Y bring to the table around our worldview, around our sciences, around our philosophies. And a whole bunch of different terms that are in English that we don't even have in our Hilekw language, but as much about our worldview, how it is we relate to humans and non-humans, the linearness of time that we look at differently. So I hope this is an opportunity for you to learn a little bit in the next while that really sets the table for the discussion we'll have, not only here today, but beyond as well. So inviting forward S.A.Y Sila to share with our folks gathered here.
S.A.Y. Til Sq'eq'el Sq'eq'lo that S.A.Y til Sq'eq'eyl Sq'eq'eyl. I'm really honored and happy to be invited here today. I'm from the Point family. My name is Wendy Ritchie. And I was, when Diane first approached me, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to say? How am I going to share? Do I know enough? And so I thought, I need to look at the Sq'eq'lo Atlas. Maybe I need to look at my grandfather's notes. And then while I was sitting here, I was thinking of what my husband would always say, my late husband. He would always say, spirit first. So begin with a prayer and then listen to your heart. O Chicha Siam, Lua Tsi Te Sq'eq'eyl, Equalatzet Skap Castata Tilt, Hothmet Tilt Sq'eq'o, Hothmet Tilt Slamuk Alala, Equaliltzet Teliso, Muktel Sq'eq'o. So good grandmothers, good grandfathers, creator of all good things, ask in a good way, in a humble way, to have good sharing today, good feelings, good thoughts, so that we can all come together in a good way with good outcomes while these meetings take place. Our Mother Earth is suffering. The people are suffering. And ask that you take care of them mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. With this, I say all my relations, S.A.Y. So I also learned, I thought I would start at the beginning with the story, origin story of our Salish people. So in the beginning of time, Creator had the ones that fly. He had the ones that crawl on the earth, the four-legged. He had the rooted, and he had the winged. And he thought, all of these are really good, but I can't really converse with any of them. So he thought he'd create one more and that's the two-legged, that's us. So he called all the other beings together to a big meeting. He told them to come to witness his new creation. So they all came. And he grabbed some soil and he blew in his hand and he created man. And he grabbed more soil and he blew in his hand and he created woman. And he asked all the other beings to support the two-legged the best way that they could so that they could survive for generations to come. And the great bear came forward and he said, I offer myself for food, clothing, medicine, utensils, and shelter to the two-legged. And all I ask in return is respect. And the creator thought that was good. Thank the bear for coming forward and representing all the fur-bearing animals and the four-legged animals. And the bitterroot came forward and offered themselves as food, clothing, medicine, shelter, and utensils, and representing all those that are underground, and said all they ask in return is respect. And the creator thought that was good. And a huckleberry came forward and also offered for all those growing above ground for food, clothing, medicine, shelter, and utensils. And all they ask in return is respect. And the creator thought, wow, these beings are so amazing that they're so willing to support the two-legged. And the salmon came out of the water and he too offered himself as food, clothing, medicine, shelter, and utensils. And all he asked for in return is respect. And just then the eagle whistled and came down. And he too offered himself to take the prayers of the two-legged to the creator of all good things and the good grandmothers and the good grandfathers that walked here before us, to uplift the two-legged in a good way so that they'll always be protected and cared for and have their needs met. So this is our creation story. And as you all know, the winged, the rooted, the plants that grow above, the four-legged, and the finned, they can all live without us. They can survive. They were here thousands of years before us. They'll be here thousands of years after us if we respect them. Because you can't live without them. You can't survive without food. You can't survive without shelter, clothing, utensils. So it's really important what you're doing today on the basis of our philosophy and our origin stories, that we as two-legged have to realize we can't survive on Mother Earth without all the other elements and beings that are in this earth. We can't survive without air. We can't survive without water. So each and every day, you need to be thankful. You need to be respectful. And you need to honor the other beings that are here on this earth that sustain our lives. Because without them, we wouldn't exist. So I really hope that story helps you. I really hope that your day is fruitful and full of good discussions. I took the opportunity to speak with my mother last night. She's 96, so she's seen a lot. She's going blind, but she has a good memory. And a long time ago, believe it or not, when she was born, her head was pierced from the back with a wooden rod. And that was meant to keep her memory clear and strong because she was a hereditary carrier. She goes back 7 generations to Chilliwack. Chilliwack was the biggest warrior protector at the head of the Sumas Lake. And he protected the Fraser Valley people from raiders, because raiders would come from as far as the Queen Charlotte Islands to take the women and the children. So he would guard the head of the lake to protect the people and from resources as well. So it was really important that the elders do what they always do to hereditary carriers by piercing her brain. I couldn't even imagine handing over one of my babies to have that done today. But I guess back then it was a custom and a ritual that was practiced by experts. So my mom has a very sharp memory as a 96-year-old. And she shared with me that out here at this little creek that you see now, a little trickle of a creek, used to be the Chilliwack River. And before the Sumas Lake was drained, when the springtime would come and the snow was melting off the mountains, the Sumas Lake would come all the way up to here. And my great grandfather, Sq'eq'eyl, had a cabin just down the little hill here. You still see a little house there. That was the location of his cabin. And it was only there for his summertime camp, where he would come and fish a lot in the Chilliwack River and gather medicines. So he was there after the lake receded, and the surveyors came through with the Indian agents, and they asked him, he was from Popcom, and they asked him, do you want to stay here or do you want to go back to Popcom and reside there? And he decided to stay here because of the resources that were here. So there was plenty of salmon coming up our Chilliwack River until one day they decided to change it and alter the river and bring it to flow into the Vedder River, which then would flow into the Fraser River. But he was here already. So his family developed and grew, and that's where we ended up staying here at Sq'eq'eyl. And it's sad because we don't have that resource anymore. We have the fish hatchery, but that's for preservation, to have the eggs moving along in their growth and development. We don't eat the salmon from there. So as we all came here or grew up here, I remember playing down at the creek, catching frogs and tadpoles, and we used to even swim in it, but we can't do that anymore. And we used to be able to swim in the Sardis Park Pond too. That was one of our greatest swimming holes, and we can't go there anymore. When I was a child, there was just nothing but hop fields and potato fields and corn fields, which is now the Cottonwood Mall and the Chilliwack Mall. And there was just 4 little businesses down at the corner of Vedder Road and Knight Road. So it's changed so much. Sometimes I feel claustrophobic. Sometimes I wish I could move to safer grounds, which I feel safer in, where there's just nature, creeks or rivers, like up at Chilliwack Lake, even though Chilliwack Lake is getting populated now too. So it's so different now today, what you see here. And growth and progress happens. We can't turn it around. We can't stop it. Heaven forbid we ever have a disaster here. But this is what I was talking with my mom about, and she hopes that good things come out of your meetings that you have. She worries about the earth. She worries about our families. She's always got us making emergency plans. So our plan is my brothers all bought RVs, and if we have a disaster, we're going to meet and go up to Chilliwack Lake and possibly, if we have to, make a new home there. But she even wants us to go further. She'd like to see us move up north to preserve our family, to save our family. She has property up there. My sisters have just returned back there 2 weeks ago. So they're going to live there now, and they have the door open for all of us to move there if we had to. It would be a shame to have to leave our home. I've been here for all my life, and it's just beautiful what we have. And I hope that you see the beauty in it. And I hope you take something away from the story that I shared. S.A.Y, thank you for listening, all my relations.
Thank you so much, tselíya, for sharing all that you have and for bringing your mother here into the room with us. That's a precious thing. And so from what tselíya has just shared with us, we're going to come together and give you the opportunity to reflect on what has just been shared. This is our way also of ensuring that we're grounded today in a longer perspective of this place, in a deeper perspective of this place. We can be so oriented towards the future, towards where we're running to. And it's very important that we also recognize those underground and the roots and where we're coming from. And so we're going to take a few minutes here and just turn to someone else in the room. And we'll just take a couple of minutes, introduce yourself, and share a reflection that you have about what was just shared. And if there's anything you'd also like to share about what's brought you here, what you're hoping for from today's conversation. But thank you so much for all that you've shared. Okay. So we're going to take just a few minutes. So turn to someone and just take a couple of minutes each to share what's a reflection you have on these stories and what's brought you here. We're at the midpoint, so if you haven't shared from both partners, just switch to the second partner now. All right, so just wrapping up what you're on, and if you can hear me, please raise your hand and bring your conversations to a close. Wonderful. Thank you all. Fantastic. So hopefully you're starting to get to connect with folks at your table, and there will be much more time for that as we go through the day. We'll be mixing around as well. We'll switch up the tables as we go. So you should get to talk to a number of different people. And so yes, just a welcome and entry into that here. So we're going to move towards this first conversation this morning around regional priorities. And before we do that, we're going to have a couple of folks speak a little bit to the context of where we are in the province, in the region, with our local communities. And that's going to set us up here for the next conversations. I see some folks making a move to the bathroom and coffee and such things. Feel free to take care of your needs. We will have a break also. Where is this? Right after this. So we've got a few presentations here, and then we'll have a break right after this. So so also know that that's coming up. All right, I'll hand it over to Tyrone McNeil again.
So as I invite forward Minister Bowinn to share some updates and remarks, just want to share with her and everybody here that this is an opportunity for the minister to have a bit of a deeper understanding of what it is that we're trying to do here in this region. That although the Emergency Planning Secretariat, the Lower Fraser Floodplain Coalition are leading it, it's much broader than us, much more inclusive of us. And also an opportunity for her to learn that there are some provincial initiatives happening that we're not necessarily involved in, and really encourage her to pay attention to this discussion, this dialogue with you and future dialogues on how it is we best advance our interests within her mandate, within her authority. Appreciating the ministry is new. It replaced Emergency Management BC, and there's a little bit of transition. I hope that it's coming to an end soon in terms of transition, staffing, mandate and whatnot. I'll turn it over to Minister Ma to share with you for about 20 minutes, and then Gillian and I'll do a bit of a deeper sharing on Emergency Planning Secretariat. And I think between those two in particular should really set the tone for the dialogue the rest of today. Minister Ma.
Wonderful. Is somebody putting the slides up for me and I just kind of point, or is that okay? No, that's great. That's great. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me here with all of you on the territory of the Sq'eq'o peoples, on Sq'eq'o land, really, and in your beautiful building. Thank you so much for hosting us. Oh, I should probably not do that too much because I understand that this is probably moving around. I'll try to talk this way so that the audio is more consistent. But it is really such an honor to be on Sq'eq'o land today, and in this beautiful building, and to have an opportunity to address a topic that I know that we are all very passionate about, that we've all come together to discuss. Before I go on, I did want to make a few acknowledgements. Thank you so much, Regional Chief Tyrone McNeil, for having so many conversations with me since the beginning. It's been really an honor to get to know you. I'm not going to name all the dignitaries I see today, or that'll be the entire 20 minutes, but I did want to acknowledge some of my direct colleagues. I have a government MLA, Bob Deeth, with me from Maple Ridge Mission. Did I get the right one? Maple Ridge Mission. Bruce Bamman from the official opposition, MLA for Abbotsford South, is also here somewhere in the room as well. So really grateful for the opportunity to work with them as well. So over the last several years, we have seen an increase in the frequency, scale, and scope of extreme weather events impacting all corners of our province. And I know many of us here in this room have seen the effects of that as well, oftentimes and directly within our communities. And we face new challenges daily as a result of the climate crisis, and it is shining a bright light on the shortcomings of our previous and our current emergency management systems, and compel us to do things better, do things differently as well. Being a new minister in a brand new ministry, I've visited many different communities to learn about regional perspectives on the climate crisis. And whether people are from Vancouver Island or the Kootenays, the Okanagan, Northern Interior, or here on Sq'eq'o territories, I hear an acknowledgement that the climate crisis is real. And I hear a desire to take action now to confront that reality and minimize its impacts. Because even as we do the work that we have to do every single day to drive down the greenhouse gas emissions that result in climate change, that are resulting in a lot of the extreme weather events that we see now, we must also be ready for the impacts that are already here in British Columbia. And as we reflect on the last few years, we can't ignore the extreme hardships that many British Columbians face due to devastating wildfires, floods, landslides. And I want to thank the First Nations and local governments across the province, many of you who are in this room, who have been working so hard with us through these difficult times. Not everything has been smooth, but we've learned a lot from these experiences, which is why we must continue to learn from past emergencies, build our capacity to prepare for and mitigate the risk of future emergencies. And the only way to do that is together. Next slide, please. So built on the sturdy bones of what used to be known as EMBC, Emergency Management BC, the creation of our new ministry, Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, occurred in December of 2022 and was demonstrative of our government's acknowledgement about the realities that we face now in terms of climate change and will face in the future in terms of disasters. And the need not only to be good at responding and recovering from emergencies, but also to understand the disaster risks ahead of time so that we can prepare for and mitigate the impacts of those disasters before they happen. This is the work that British Columbia committed to doing when we became the first jurisdiction in Canada to sign on to the S.A.Y framework for disaster risk reduction. We committed to understand disaster risk, to strengthen disaster risk governance, to invest in disaster risk reduction and enhance disaster preparedness for effective response, and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. The S.A.Y framework priorities underpin all of the initiatives and steps that EMCR, Emergency Management and Climate Readiness, is taking to modernize emergency management. And as a ministry, we are responsible for providing cross-ministry and cross-government coordination for government's work to enhance BC's readiness for and resiliency to climate and disaster risks. And we're also responsible for ensuring a more comprehensive and connected approach to achieving climate and disaster risk reduction. We will and do work closely with ministries across government that are responsible for related strategies like the Climate Preparedness and Adaptation Strategy and the BC Flood Strategy. Those other ministries continue to lead on the operational delivery of those strategies, but we work very closely together. But another key driver behind the creation of EMCR was our commitment to establishing Indigenous peoples as partners and leaders in emergency management and disaster recovery. It is an extension of our government's commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and we will continue the tremendous progress that has been made in the organization to date with partnership agreements and co-development of legislation. There's been a lot of progress, but there's still a lot more to do. Next slide, please. Creating a new ministry is an important part of modernizing emergency management in the province. And another critical component of work that we have underway is updating the legislation itself. This work speaks to the second principle of S.A.Y, which is to strengthen disaster risk governance, as well as the fourth principle to put a greater emphasis on preparedness and mitigation of impacts before they happen by building our communities better and building back better as well. I'm pleased to report that we have now finalized updated emergency management legislation to replace the Emergency Program Act and are now headed into co-development work with Indigenous partners on the regulations that will bring this enabling legislation to life on the ground within our communities. Work to modernize legislation began with engagement in 2019 and 2020, but with the pandemic and some very severe climate conditions in 2021, plans for this legislation had to be shifted to ensure that we had the capacity to address all of the extraordinary events. So it is a little later than we had hoped for. But in 2022, my ministry reconnected with First Nations partners to ensure new legislation reflected their interests and also that they incorporated the learnings that we had from the last few years. Since then, we have worked to co-develop the legislation with First Nations, making this the first major land-based statute to be co-developed to ensure strong alignment with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Our work has also involved staying connected with local governments and the Union of BC Municipalities, and the legislation reflects their input as well. And we had originally planned to introduce the new legislation in the spring of this year, but some communities had requested more time and identified that there needed to be more time to understand the changes and put in place the supports that communities, First Nations would need to actually ensure that the implementation of the legislation went well. So in response to this feedback, we will be tabling it in the fall. But all this being said, let me emphasize again that the legislation is quite broad and enabling, especially when it comes to how it recognizes and makes space for the role of First Nations and Indigenous communities as to be equal partners in emergency management in the province. How this broad and enabling legislation, how the principles of cooperation and collaboration with Indigenous partners will show up in our communities on the ground will be unique to every region because the circumstances and the partnerships in every region of the province are unique. And the regulations to guide this will be co-developed with First Nations and will be informed by engagement with Indigenous governments, organizations, local authorities, critical infrastructure sectors, service providers, and the public in the coming months. So we have the high level, the legislation itself, which is very broad and enabling. Then we have the regulations that are under development during the summer that will provide greater guidance for what will happen on the ground. And then the legislation also enables specific agreements to be created within regions with specific communities and First Nations about how those agreements play out on the ground as well. So my ministry will work closely with all of these partners to make sure that we're well prepared to operate under this new legislative framework that will be introduced in the fall, and that the regulations make sense on the ground and that you actually see the changes come through in your communities that we intend through the legislation. We're also developing supports and materials that will provide additional direction and explanations on how this legislation is going to be implemented, what the new requirements and duties are, the powers and obligations of local authorities, critical infrastructure providers, and so forth. So if you feel as though you kind of have a general sense of where the legislation is going, but you don't know what that means for you and your communities, don't worry, that work, we are developing the resources to support you in that. So there is still considerable work ahead, and we recognize that with the increasing frequency and severity of emergencies in BC, we'll need to evaluate and revisit this new framework to ensure that the statute and the regulations actually meet the needs of British Columbians. So that's why the new legislation includes a requirement for a 5-year review. So we're bringing in new legislation. We know that it probably isn't going to be perfect right off the get-go. We'll learn through the next 5 years. We're going to reopen it again when we've had some experience with it and address some of the issues that may come up, or improvements that may need to be implemented. And I do want to express a deep, deep gratitude to everyone who's participated in the process so far and who will continue to participate in the process as we move forward. Next slide. I know this is very dense presentation, by the way. We wanted to cover all the topics we were asked to cover. This has been discussed in other different forums before, but I wanted to touch a little bit on what the actual policy shifts being proposed by the new legislation are. So the goals of the new modernized legislation are to integrate the S.A.Y framework for disaster risk reduction, to include all 4 phases of emergency management, to align it with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, and to address climate change impacts. Notably, the current Emergency Program Act is absolutely silent on the existence and the role of Indigenous people and First Nations, and that can't go on. It is also silent on climate change, and obviously we can't let that go on either. The new legislation will require a climate lens to be applied to risk assessments in the province, and the risk assessments done by local authorities, critical infrastructure owners, and so forth. The legislation will also require that these risk assessments and emergency management plans be prepared in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous governing bodies. So significant shifts in modernizing legislation that will help it align better with the Declaration Act include recognition of Indigenous rights in relation to emergencies, and recognition of the importance of Indigenous advice, knowledge, input, stewardship in emergency management. It also enables agreements like the agreements I referred to earlier to be entered into with Indigenous governing bodies to support collaboration and decision-making. It will require regulated entities like the province, local government, critical infrastructure owners to consult and cooperate with Indigenous governing bodies across all 4 phases of emergency management and prior to taking land-based response actions. And it will introduce requirements to consider vulnerability, cultural safety, intersectionality when we're preparing risk assessments. Emergency management plans and training will also need to embed cultural safety in all aspects of emergency management planning, and it will require regulated entities to access available Indigenous knowledge and include in risk assessment and plans there's statutory protections for Indigenous knowledge as well. So again, I emphasize the legislation lays out these policies and these intents in a broad and enabling manner, but how this actually plays out on the ground will be co-developed through regulations and established through the agreements that are had with individual organizations within communities as well. And that work is going to be happening this summer. Well, we're starting on some of the regulations this summer, and there'll be likely more regulations that will come out in the years ahead. Another key design other key design principles will include putting safety first, transparent decision-making, improved funding mechanisms, and a focus on inclusion. Next slide. Another critical component of modernizing our system is Principle 1 of Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is to understand the risks that we are facing. Recent climate and disaster events in BC highlight the importance of identifying and reducing disaster and climate risk, but we can't do that if we don't know what it is that we're facing. And so we're actually working to build a province-wide understanding of our risks. My ministry is partnering with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy on the development of a provincial disaster and climate risk and resilience assessment. And this assessment will build on the preliminary strategic climate risk assessment for BC that was published a few years ago in 2019, and will integrate disaster and climate risk in both extreme events such as floods, wildfires, and landslides, just floods and wildfires, and seismic events, as well as slow onset of climate risks such as sea level rise and ecosystem change. We are committed to co-developing the assessment with Indigenous partners using a distinctions-based approach, and we'll also be engaging extensively and inviting contributions to the assessment from local governments, critical infrastructure owners, and other partners. I should pause there. When I say critical infrastructure owners, I mean owners of, for instance, critical transportation infrastructure or energy infrastructure. A lot of it is public, some of it is private as well. Some energy infrastructure is private as well. So those are examples of what I mean when I refer to critical infrastructure owners. Telecommunications, that's a big one as well. The methods developed in this provincial risk assessment process will inform our approach to the subsequent regional assessments, which are likely to be more useful to communities on the ground, and provide guidance for future risk assessments undertaken by regulated parties, which include a lot of your organizations under the new emergency management legislation. From this work, we envision a range of products, including data sets that will help inform the priorities and investments of all governments to reduce disaster risk. So some of these data sets might be produced in products like maps, case studies, story maps, technical reports. All of this will be made public on climatereadybc.ca. And that work will hopefully inform a lot of the work that you'll be doing in the years ahead as well to assess disaster risk in your own communities. We're also working closely with Finesse to link Climate Ready BC and Finesse their Lightship platform to ensure that information is available through both portals. Next slide. So modernized emergency management also includes better collaboration between ministries on key initiatives. The Ministry of Forests, in co-sponsorship with my ministry, has been engaging with partners in the development of a BC flood strategy since 2020. I know this work is really close to Regional Chief Tyrone, McNeil's heart, and you've been working very closely on that. The strategy will support progress towards a more flood resilient flood resilient British Columbia in a changing climate, including addressing ongoing flood management challenges, increasing partnerships with First Nations and local governments, and improving public safety. The strategy will also address provincial commitments in the Declaration Act and align with the UN S.A.Y framework. Overall, a holistic approach to flood management is envisioned as interdisciplinary, balanced, Indigenous-centered with connections across a network of relations within watersheds, ecosystems, land, and society. The strategy, which we intend to release later this year, will then be followed by a deeper dive into BC flood resilience and implementation planning. Next slide. So a key piece of work that provides a foundation for the final flood strategy is the Pathways to Action report. This is a report that summarizes progress to date on key issues relevant to flood management in the Lower Mainland and opportunities for all orders of government to move forward collaboratively to reduce flood risk, increase resilience, and adapt to climate change. This work was developed at the direction, or the report and recommendations were developed at the direction of the LMFMS Leadership Committee with input from a multi-jurisdictional working group and the Emergency Planning Secretariat. The Pathways to Action report supports establishing a collaborative approach to working together across orders of government in one of the most jurisdictionally complex parts of the country. And an implementation committee is being considered to help move forward in an inclusive way with the Pathways to Action recommendations. Next slide. So as work continues, and this is a pretty heavy slide, all of them are pretty heavy slides, wanted to make sure that we actually provided you with some concrete steps and description of the work that's actually being undertaken in the province. And it is important to understand how the different flood planning initiatives happening now are linked. So generally speaking, planning is happening at multiple scales as federal, provincial, First Nations, and local governments work to support communities both recovering from the impacts of 2021 atmospheric river event and investing in the flood resilient solutions of the future as well. So the BC flood strategy is intended to support multiple planning scales under an enabling vision and principles that recognize the importance of watershed scale flood planning and planning processes. So not, moving beyond the flood planning by individual communities and individual local governments and imagining that flood waters are going to stop at the municipal boundaries. We know that that doesn't happen. We must take a broader watershed scale look. It is important that we keep the channels of communication open as we find alignment, set priorities, include differing perspectives. And it's through dialogues like the ones that we're having today that we can apply our shared learnings and together define what it means to have BC as a flood resilient province and have a flood resilient future. Next slide. I have shared with you, next slide. Yeah, thank you. I've shared with you many of the future improvements that the province is currently working on, but I also know that people living in the Fraser Valley across this region are still recovering from previous emergency events as well. So I wanted to share with you some of the recovery related improvements that we've already made and in partnership with many of our partners. This work, of course, aligns with the S.A.Y framework for disaster risk reductions priority 3, which is investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. So as an example, we recently announced the Sumas River Flood Mitigation Framework with our partners in Samath and Hilekw and Chilliwack and Abbotsford. It's a multi-government effort to make the area around Abbotsford, basically the Sumas Prairie, formerly Sumas Lake, more resilient to flooding. When I look at the complex challenges facing our communities today, I'm often reminded of a quote that I bring up, I've brought up quite a few times now, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Now, I fully acknowledge that there is sometimes utility in going at it alone, but fast doesn't always mean better. In fact, oftentimes our hubris in thinking that we alone have all of the answers means that we end up making the same mistakes over and over, and we never actually get anywhere on the fundamental issues that we face. The partnership that we established around Sumas is based on going at it together, believing that our collaborative and collective efforts brought together will result in solutions that fundamentally reduce the impact of future flooding events. Okay. Earlier this month, we also announced that Metro Vancouver, Lacamo First Nation, Fraser Valley Regional District, and the District of Hope will receive just shy of $7.5 million to increase flood resilience along the banks of the Sq'eq'o River, the Fraser River, and Hatsuck Lake, including critical watersheds. And we recently announced that BC communities will have access to high quality elevation data to support effective planning for floods, landslides, fires, and other natural disasters caused by climate change. So these tools, and as we create more tools, will all be available at climatereadybc.ca. That's the one-stop hub that we announced earlier this year to help communities and people prepare for and mitigate disaster and climate risks. And alongside Climate Ready BC, we also announced a historic investment of $180 million, additional $180 million to the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund to help communities strengthen their resilience to climate change. That fund has so far funded, I think, almost 1,400 preparation and mitigation projects across the province so far. And this new money brings the total investment in this program to $369 million. Now, I recognize that it might seem like a lot in a specific chunk, but some of the scale of the challenges that we are facing as a province will likely require far more money, a lot of partnership with federal governments as well. So we're keenly aware of that, but it is a significant chunk of money that is committed to First Nations and communities for their projects. I encourage you to take a look at it. Many different streams around planning, preparation, evacuation route planning, structural projects up to $5 million. It's being administered by UBCM. So if you haven't taken a look at it yet, I really encourage you to do so. Further to progress being made in areas like the Fraser Valley, we announced in April earlier this year that the province would provide the city of Abbotsford with $3.2 million for flood protection resiliency upgrades for Barrowtown Pump Station, and an additional $5.28 million for additional recovery projects as well. We also were with Sq'eq'o First Nation earlier this year, announcing $5 million in funding for shoreline stabilization to complement a new dike along the Fraser River. And all told, our government to date has provided close to $100 million since 2020 so far to support Abbotsford and the Fraser Valley in their flood recovery and mitigation work. And we're committed to continuing that work because I know there's a lot more to do to build resilience in the area. Next slide. We're coming to the end. You're all very patient. I think you're all quite familiar with the Disaster Financial Assistance Program already, so I'll keep my remarks higher level. The current provincial disaster recovery support includes the provision of disaster financial assistance. This program aids eligible recipients who suffer damages or loss because of a major emergency or disaster where insurance for the losses is not available. So it is not a replacement for insurance. It is financial assistance for damage and losses that are not insurable. There are two DFA categories. There's the private sector assistance, which is available to homeowners, residential tenants, businesses, charitable organizations, farmers with losses that couldn't be covered by insurance providers. And there's the public sector assistance, which is available to local governments and Indigenous communities in the same circumstances. However, we also know there are significant opportunities for improvement of the DFA program, which is why we will also be developing new regulation and modernizing the DFA programs to provide better assistance after disaster. And this work will begin after the legislation is introduced in the fall. Next slide. And even though we're planning to develop a whole new DFA regulation, we also didn't hesitate to make rapid changes recently based on significant events over the last few years. So as an example, for the following the atmospheric river event of 2021 in the public sector piece of DFA, we improved the cost share formula for communities. It used to be 80-20 province to communities. We moved that up to 90-10, so that, and up to 95-5. So 95% paid for by the province and 5% paid for by the community, meaning that the province picks up way more of the tab for recovery than we did before. We also updated the program to be able to cover more upfront costs for cash-strapped communities as well. Local governments can now also combine a variety of funding programs, such as disaster mitigation funding, so DMAF, disaster mitigation and adaptation funding programs with DFA. Basically, we've made it more flexible and better for communities. And for the private sector, we increased limits to assistance from 300,000 to 400,000, and we expanded the eligibility of small businesses so that more businesses could qualify for the program. Last slide. So this is a pretty long presentation. I want to thank you for sticking with me till the end. And I hope I've conveyed to you some of the ways that we're working to modernize emergency management in BC. We know that there is a lot more to do. As we noted, the ministry was created brand new back in December, but it was built on a very strong foundation of EMBC. And a lot of what I've learned in recent months is that a lot of the staff of EMBC that are now staffed with EMCR had this vision of modernizing emergency management, taking into account climate readiness, being more proactive instead of just waiting for disasters to hit us and then reacting for a long, long time. But it was challenging for that work to go forward when they were operating as a much smaller organization. With the establishment of a new ministry, it provides us with a much more political focus on the work ahead of us. And we are so incredibly excited to work with all of you on the work ahead as well. I want to close also by expressing my deep gratitude for all of the work that all of you and your teams have been doing for our communities. It has not been an easy few years, and unfortunately, it is only likely to become more challenging in the years ahead. I want to thank, of course, all of the people who organized this forum today. We at EMCR, we were so pleased to be able to financially contribute to $200,000 to EPS in support of this forum and all of the other important work that EPS does. And when I reflect on BC's role in supporting the overall work, and I say role because emergency management, as all of you likely know, really does require all of us. There's a role for every level of government, every individual, every household, every organization in the province has a role when it comes to ensuring that our communities are safe from emergencies. But when I reflect on the work that we're doing, and I am drawn back to the 5 principles that you've set forward through this forum last year, there's so much alignment. You know, our work to reduce risk and adapt to climate change, to advance reconciliation, to help preserve healthy ecosystems, to support sustainable economies and resilient communities. And finally, perhaps most importantly, knowing that the only way we will get to where we need to go is if we acknowledge that everyone needs to be a part of the solution. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. The work here today will help us go far. And we're going to do that together. So thank you so much for the opportunity to kind of present a pretty dense slide deck there. I really look forward to the conversations for the rest of the day.
Okay, so we're going to hear just a little bit more context. That was the provincial overview. So much has happened since last year, and thank you so much for really framing that in ways that are relevant to communities and the questions that folks have on the ground as well. So we're going to hear next from Tyrone and Gillian, and then from Jason to get more of the context from a regional perspective as well of where the priorities are and what's happened since last year.
Hello. So by Tyrone and Gillian, we mean mostly Gillian with some Tyrone. So thank you so much again for the opportunity to speak. It's really exciting. We've been working on what we're calling Sq'eq'o. Is there a next slide? Please and thank you. Awesome. So this is our Regional Resilience Action Plan. Again, we work with 31 mainland Coast Salish First Nations on everything to do with emergency planning, response, and resilience. And Sq'eq'o is the action plan that we put together based off of the Sunday framework to help shift us away from the responsive way that we handle emergencies right now to something that's more resilient, AKA we can have an event and we don't see the stress and the consequences that we see currently. So that's what we're trying to get to. So Sq'eq'o is Hilekw for to get ready together, which is essentially what we want to do. We want to work together. This is specifically for 31 mainland Coast Salish First Nations at the moment, but working together, all 31 communities to get ready together and to find that place of resilience, acknowledging that having a fully functional emergency response program and being completely resilient takes a lot of work, and being able to lean on each other as communities will get us further along the way, just as Minister Mo was saying. It's a framework to support, again, mainland Coast Salish in developing protocols for climate adaptation and disaster resilience based on community values to build internal capacity, which will then become regional capacity. So the more we invest in communities, the more we invest in individual homes, and then invest in regional cooperation. That's how we get there. It's weaving together First Nations expertise and cultural practices with best practices around the world. So as we know, communities have lived here since time immemorial, and they didn't have an issue with flooding before. So we want to take some of that expertise and weave it into this plan to see what we can learn. Also supporting communities in assessing and addressing risks from climate change and planning for resilience in a proactive manner on all traditional lands. So as Tyrone was talking about, not just reserve lands, but all traditional lands. And again, planning for, at the moment, Tyrone gave us a number of different estimations of rainfall that happened in a couple of areas around the states. The issue is we don't have a prediction for what that might be in this area, and that's something we need. How do we know what to plan for if we don't know what the risk is? So we definitely need those climate predictions, and that's something we have in our plan. And then finally, supporting regional collaboration between communities and their neighbors and increasing community capacity inside community and between communities working together. And I also just want to point out this artwork is by an amazing artist named Carey Victor, who lives up the road in Chiam. And this actually represents the Tamiak principle that Tyrone introduced to us earlier. So that's 7th generation ancestor back and your 7th generation ancestor forward. And I think it's just beautiful. Next slide, please. Our action plan is based like this. So it does take the base priorities from the Sendai framework. So starting with understanding disaster risk, going to governance, and then investing in risk reduction and resilience, and enhancing preparedness and build back better. But underneath all of those priorities are 2 foundational pillars, which we call strengthening tactical capacity. So that's strengthening our ability to plan and to respond to emergencies. And then below that is what we call Hiathmithet. That means to take care of each other in Hilekw. What we're thinking about that is, as we've seen from the past couple of years with many communities, we're all tired from the number of emergencies. And it's hard to take care of your community when they're going through emergency after emergency. And it's also hard for the emergency managers, I'm looking at a couple of you in the audience right now, to look after yourselves while you're busy looking after your community. So Hiathmithet is taking a bit of a spin on that and trying to emphasize wellness for the community. And that's not just rest, but also cultural wellness, spiritual wellness, and other things. Trauma processing, all of those things for both your first responders, your emergency program coordinators, and your community. The other thing is it focuses on humanitarian aid. So right now we have a model called Emergency Social Services, Support Services, ESS. But really ESS is based on someone being out of their house for about a day or 2 days. Whereas what we saw last year from Lytton, we may be out of our houses for much longer than that. And in those cases, the ESS model, which doesn't allow for you to, for example, shop at a grocery store regularly, doesn't provide what you would need to survive or to live normally as a human when you're outside of your community. So we're looking instead to the sphere model, which is used for humanitarian aid in, for example, in war-torn countries where people may be out of their homes for years. That's more likely going to be more akin to what we experience with the disasters that are coming with climate change. So trying to pull, sorry, that's very doomsday, but trying to pull from the lessons learned from there and how we can better provide for communities when they're outside of their community, and have access to things like cultural supports, fish, as opposed to just fast food, things like that. Okay, next slide. Oh, it's really small. Sorry about that. So these are some of the guiding principles of our plan, some of the things that we're looking to implement and see. And again, this is another drawing from Carey Lynn Victor. It's a wellness fish, we're calling it, but it's really just emphasizing that everything is contained within this fish. When we look at the salmon and the ecosystems, that's the base of wellness for a lot of communities. And so there's a person in there, but it's showing that everything in there is connected. So some of these principles, if I can read them, are resilience planning over protection, leveraging nature-based solutions and water storage, enhancing biodiversity and protecting non-human relatives, enhancing food security, supporting regional and local collaboration. So again, in community, between community, but also collaboration like this. Protection of cultural, spiritual, and archaeological sites, weaving mainland Coast Salish knowledge, protocols, and culture. So we've been trying to do that a little bit through the facilitation of the event, but there's a lot more that we can do in terms of working together and managing some of the resources that we have. Hiathmithet, as I mentioned before, is community and first responder wellness and looking after community members that may be out of community during an emergency. We also have cultural competency. So what that means is if you look at, for example, a registration center, if First Nations, for example, are uncomfortable going to a registration center because they feel they may be mistreated, that model is not culturally competent because it doesn't provide the same services to the First Nation community as it does to other communities. So that's what we mean by that, is just making sure that the services are received on the end by different groups in the way that they're intended. And so we want to take a broad look at all of the policies and services that are being provided and make sure that they're culturally competent. And finally, I believe Tyrone mentioned this earlier, First Nations exercising jurisdiction over traditional territory, aka Article 29 of DRIPA. All right, anything to add, Tyrone? All right, that's it from me. Thank you.
I just want to quickly add, Gillian always says she's nervous, but more times she does this, she comes across better. And she does do a good job of presenting what it is that we're doing and trying to do within the Emergency Planning Secretariat. But a couple of pieces we missed is that right from the get-go, when we created the Emergency Planning Secretariat, we wanted a really small office, but one that supports and advocates for our 31 communities in a way that we're not competing for resources, competing for human power to staff that office. And a really good example here, Diane Garner here, one of my staff members. Right now, I've got three staff members. We have 3 postings out right now. So small office, right? But Sq'eq'eyl, just north of us here, has all those wildfires next to them. So they called up Diane here, and Diane went and provided immediate support. And from what I hear from Sq'eq'eyl, they really appreciate the support from Diane and the EPS. And that's really our functional role, right? Not to replace anybody, but to support, assist, and advocate for. And then the end game, end objective of where it is that we'd like to go with Hilekw is to be in a position where when the minister is up here announcing things like DFA, really what I'm seeing is funding streams that don't necessarily align with our intentions here. And the rules of the game right now, somebody makes these requirements, these funding streams in Victoria and Ottawa, and we have to put in proposals to meet those requirements in order to get funding. Well, ideally, in the next short while, and by short while, I say 2 to 3 years, we'll have a strategy flushed out, described, and budget in such a way that, hey, Minister Ma, we need X amount of dollars to do this. We need X amount of dollars to do that. We don't care where it comes from or which file, we need this. And I do similar with federal governments and agencies as well. And I purposely put it that way because the best example of that after the November 2021 rain event, fluvial event, you heard Minister Blair on December 14th announce $5.1 billion for that rain event recovery. June 14th, 2022, the same Minister Blair announced that $5.1 billion for all things flood, all things wildfire, 2021 and 2022. Why did he do that? Because we did not have a plan. We didn't have a specific ask. So that we need to be really clear on that as we develop a strategy. What is our ask going to be in terms of the narrative that describes and some ways justifies that ask, but also we need to budget it out. We need to start telling government we need X amount of dollars for training, X amount of dollars for resilience. I know you local governments are tired of when one of your culverts is washed out. Right now, you have to put in that same size culvert. Well, let's put in the Build Back Better approach and put in bigger culverts or bridges. And my last comment for now, when you heard the minister in her 20 or so minutes, I lost count after 19 times she mentioned Indigenous. And really, for you local governments, that's the legal, there's a changing landscape here in BC. We hear it from provincial officials right up to the premier, federal officials, ways of including us the way we've never, ever been included before. And that's going to be new. It's something we've been striving for. And I'm literally shocked at it. I go into a session, I might be the only First Nations person in a conference of 300 people. And I lose count of First Nations or Indigenous like 50 times in one day. It's a new reality. And I encourage you, particularly local governments, to embrace it. Don't be scared. Don't be shy. Regardless if you're one of the 29 local governments here in South Sq'eq'o, engage who your local First Nations are, your Sq'eq'o communities, your Coast Salish communities, establish relations with them. And the relationships will get you to where we need to be. They're not going to be honky-dory, fun, smiling all the time. They're going to be challenging. And I'll end this way. When Regional Chief Sean Atleo was the national chief, our national leader, he was often quoted telling federal government, there's two ways you can do this. There's a hard way or the harder way. There is hard work to do, but let's do it together. And I really hope the strategy, when you see it, and you'll see it in short order, we're still rolling it out to our communities. And I don't want to make it public to the general public until all of our communities had a chance to look at it and provide comments to it. But I really feel strongly that Sq'eq'o will work for our 31 communities, can work for the 29 or so local governments, can work for you as farmers, you as industry, you as developers, you as residing here in South Sq'eq'o. It can work. I just encourage everybody to have an open mind. And maybe my last comment, as soon as Erica opened it up to conversation, the room got so noisy. I was happy to hear that because you're engaged. Let's keep that up the rest of the day. Hi, Chap Gassiam.
So I know I'm the only one standing between you and our first break of the day, but I wanted to provide a little bit of an opportunity for reflection on what I've heard thus far and to give a bit of a state of play, I guess, for where we are from a local government, a regional government context. So just listening to Minister Ma struck me at your comments about taking the time to do it right. And that's been a reoccurring theme thus far. For me, it's been 12 plus years as an elected official, first elected in 2011. And the city of Chilliwack, the very first exposure to some of this was to go to the Union of BC Municipalities and bring resolution forward around bringing back predictable, stable funding support for flood mitigations. At this time, we were just talking about dikes, really. We were talking about the Fraser River flood program had gone by the wayside in '95, and it had kind of downloaded responsibility onto the local diking authorities, the local governments, and then we still had this a lottery system of who was going to be in a good position to get grants to be able to do the work that they needed to do. And after that, it was 2,556 days ago that Tyrone and I stood with a then Minister of the Crown, also from the North Shore, Naomi Yamamoto, in New West. Remember that? And we talked about the importance of flood mitigation and the importance of working together, regional collaboration. The idea that going it alone wasn't very successful. We needed to find a new approach, one that wasn't competitive, one that didn't leave communities behind, that didn't necessarily have the resources or the stable or the technical staff and support to be able to enter in the lottery, if you will. And then, you know, all that time I thought, man, we're taking so long, things are going so slow, and we got to get on this. And I in my opening comments, again, I thought about we're not set up You know, this is 4 election cycles I've been through, and we think on such short term. Listen to Elder Ritchie today talk about the long view, the Stalo view, the Stalo world view, and the idea that really we're here, but in a blink of an eye. Really, it kind of sets the context. The fact that we've done a lot, and we've actually worked hard to shift our perspectives over time. And you know, I want to acknowledge that Minister Ma, when we have conversations around the importance of slowing down the EPA modernization, to take the time to get it right, she listens. And that's incredibly important, because as local governments and the local diking authorities responsible for a lot of the flood protection structures that are in place today, it's a little bit concerning not having an idea of what will fall out of these new policies and regulations. It's a little bit concerning because we're not used to setting the table for these broader discussions with the different First Nation communities that are out in our municipalities and adjacent to municipalities in our regional governments. But rather than be scared of it, I see a lot of my colleagues here embracing the idea that it's important, so incredibly important, to build these relationships. Tyrone and I have been talking about this for 12 years, and I know that's, you know, again, in a blink of an eye for a lot of other people who've been doing this work in this room for a long time, much longer than that. But over that time, I've learned we've built this trust together. We don't always agree on every single thing, but we keep coming back to the table together. We keep coming back and bringing up issues that may be important to our respective jurisdictions that we didn't think about or never occurred. And that's incredibly important, to keep coming back. That consistency has built this trust over time. And I was thinking back, well, what am I going to say? Because it was, you know, about the local government context, because, you know, it was, 18 months ago, I think, we had a massive flood event here, and Chilliwack was basically an island. There were lots of communities essential. Roads were cut off, transportation links. There was huge impacts. I mean, we had the Prime Minister was here, for God's sakes. So, like, it was a big, massive event. And, you know, there was ministers out, a lot of talk and action. And I thought, man, but we haven't really got any shovels in the ground on anything since then. Like, if anything, that should have galvanized support. We should have had things going by now. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and I was like, but there are a lot of really good things happening actually in the background. And maybe not shovels in the ground immediately, but the goodwill that was formed and the action that are being galvanized, the MOU that Minister Ma talked about between Chilliwack and Abbotsford and Sq'eqeyl, the Sq'eq'eyl recovery watershed tables that are happening to see folks part of that table again, Mission, Lacamo, the Fraser Valley Regional District. I'm thinking about the work that Chilliwack in my home community. I mean, if we'd have continued on a diking project that we had on the books and funding available for, you know, and there was an existing dike that was there, we could have just keep piling rock on it. But instead of building a wall between communities higher, we put a pause on that and said, hang on, what are these principles? And it's actually very consistent with the 5 principles that the LFFF has come together and talked about. Principles of not leaving other communities out, about working together, about righting historical wrongs. That work's underway right now. That works. Councilor Eddie Gardner's here at the table with us. I don't know if Chief Gladstone's there or Chief Muscle, but I see Mayor Popov is here. Chilliwack put a pause on that work and instead said, how do we go back to the table a little bit and better include communities so they can be protected, so we can open up new unprecedented economic development opportunities. we can better protect a broader range of things that are important to not just local government, but to First Nation communities as well. And we applied some of those principles without even knowing it. So if you're sitting here thinking at the table, this is really, really hard and the work seems, insurmountable and it's not going fast enough, you just put forward that in a lot of communities, we're already doing it, right? It's already happening. And so if it seems like, 12, 15, whatever, 20 years is a long time, it is. But it's so incredibly important here right now that we all commit or recommit to putting our shoulder to the wheel and supporting each other. There's a lot of initiatives going on. The Pathways to Action report is out, and you can see 10 recommendations coming out of that. That's largely an evolution of the Lower Mainland flood management strategy that a lot of folks worked on, a lot of local government folks worked on, a lot of First Nation input in that. Although I treat these as not competing interests. I treat them as initiatives that we can learn and iterate and build upon, correct things that we might have overlooked and missed because we didn't have enough of these opportunities to get together face to face and learn from each other and share the things that were important to us. And so it's not a competition, right? What we should be striving to achieve, again, is, and you heard it from Minister Ma, you heard it from Tyrone, are solutions that best protect all of us and all of society approach, alignment with S.A.Y, solutions that build resilience in all of our communities, solutions that don't leave people behind, that don't ignore the four-legged and the winged ones and the rooted and the things that that are essential for our survival. And if you're thinking, man, it seems really tough, just look around and you can find examples of it already happening right now. So we appreciate again the time sharing, and look forward to learning more the rest of the day. So thanks.
All right, so break coming up here. And I just want to thank everyone for the table that has been set for us today. Hopefully you can recognize in who you've been hearing from today and the way that we've been approaching this, how we're trying to put into practice these principles that we will be talking about here and using for the rest of the day. Thank you again to Wendy Ritchie for inviting the other ones into the room, who the not two-legged ones who would otherwise not be here if not for how you're carrying them with you today, as well as local government, as well as First Nations communities, as well as the provincial government. So we're going to go to a break. We'll have about 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back and we'll set you up for the rest of the day. Is going to be a discussion. I know it's been a lot of taking in here in the first part of the day. The rest of the day is really going to be about you and your conversations at the tables. And so as you go to break, we're going to ask you to please organize yourselves in the room according to what we're using. We'll talk about this a little bit more after the break and kind of explain this a little bit, but we're looking at working as a region and using also a sub-regional model, recognizing that there's different scales that are going to be useful for different purposes as we try to work together as a region. And so we're going to use the map that EPS has drawn for their own communities. They've kind of identified 4 different parts of the region based on the river as sort of the central part of that. And mid-river, upriver, river tidal, and coastal are the groupings there. And the First Nation communities are are listed here on this slide. So if you're one of them, just note where you are, or perhaps just which one of these four that you would identify with as your community. And then on the next slide is just for the local governments, or if you're coming from other communities in the region, just to mention, we kind of broke this down so that you can easily think where you might fit in. If you feel like you actually should fit in a different category, go to that category. This is just a rough way of organizing ourselves so that we can sit together with other people from our area as we talk about what the issues are that matter to us, because we're going to have some things in common in those smaller scales and some things in common as a whole region. And so we want to start grouping you together a little bit in that way. And so if we can, yeah, we'll leave the EPS map up there, and this maps out in the room. So we've got, someone correct me if I'm wrong, look at the the signs on your table, but I believe we have mid-river here, upriver here, coastal in the back corner where Juniper is waving there, and river tidal in this back corner here. So this is the map in the room as well. And so over the break, if you could come back at the end of the break, we'll have 10 minutes, sit yourselves in these regions. All right, so if you haven't already, please moving to your next table, just take a look at the map and land at your next table. And we're gonna get going here. And if you could keep the conversations to a close, we're going to move right into hearing from Patrick Lilley. So just as you're settling, we're going to move into this next piece so that we can keep on moving and get to discussions, which is coming up next.
Thanks, Erica. Good morning, everyone. At my kids' school, they use quiet coyote, mouth closed, ears open. I'm going to try and go fast this morning so we can get to the talking where we can go more slowly and have those dialogue and conversation. I did just want to introduce myself quickly. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Patrick Lilley. I'm a third generation settler in the Lower Fraser region. I'm a biologist. I work for a consulting company called Kerr Leidal Associates, or KWL. And we do a lot of work in the region that is primarily project-based. So I often find myself working on projects that are focused on planning or planning for floods, helping build more resilience to floods, building infrastructure related to flood management. And I also, as a biologist, work a lot on projects that restore and enhance habitat. So I have a particular focus on working on salmon and salmon habitat restoration. And increasingly, I'm finding that these worlds are merging. So as I work with First Nations, with local and regional governments, with nonprofit groups, that we're starting to think about how we can advance these two priorities in parallel. And so when I got involved in the grassroots of the Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition after the November 2021 flooding, I really saw it as an opportunity to do things differently, to begin to work together and think about how we prepare for flooding, how we can find shared solutions to some of our biggest challenges together. And that's what I'm really passionate about as a professional. So I'm really privileged to be involved in this work, to work with folks like Tyrone and all of the members of the coalition. So you can move to the next slide, Dan. Thanks. So the 5 principles that we've touched on already a couple of times today, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about them in more detail. So this was largely something that came out of the last forum that we had back in July 2022, where we tried to define what working together collaboratively could look like. And these are the principles we came up with: reducing risk and adapting to climate change, advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, ensuring that salmon are thriving in the region, supporting our sustainable economies and resilient communities, and again, making everyone part of the solution. And I don't think I need to go through these in a lot of detail. I think we've touched on them in a lot of different ways already this morning. We have developed more fulsome definitions of what each of these principles means, and you can find handouts on each of your tables with those definitions. So if you want to take a look and remind yourself of what we're talking about or what we've defined as these principles, you can look at that handout. And again, I think these principles serve as important touch points, but we want to move towards action and how we can apply these principles on the ground and in the real world. Next slide, Dan. And so as I worked in the Lower Fraser, I found that at times we can have very siloed approaches to managing flood and flood risk. And so why is this? Well, I think there's a few reasons. I think, as has been pointed out, our responsibility for managing floods often resides at the lowest level of the local community level. And there's good things about that. But we know that floods don't respect those jurisdictional boundaries. And so we often need to collaborate and work collaboratively at a higher level. I think, Tyrone, you touched on this. Well, we have funding mechanisms that are often causing us to need to compete for funding for limited resources. We know there's not enough funding there. And so we end up, communities end up competing together against each other for the same funding rather than working together collaboratively. I think we've also tended to emphasize structural flood protection measures, things like dikes and pump stations and engineered solutions to this issue over a wider range of solutions, a bigger toolbox. And so there's a need to work together. There's a need to understand risk and prioritize on a regional basis. And there's a need to expand our toolbox of solutions to go beyond structural measures. And this will take working across disciplines. But if we work together, we can make the case for more funding and more resources for planning and addressing our needs and priorities. And so if we work together and cooperate together, we can begin to connect things together within our region based on our unique geography and our unique issues. And I think there are some examples in the region of this starting to emerge. I won't touch on these too much, but I think of a project that I've had the privilege of being involved with. I was involved with an assessment of sea level rise on the North Shore that involved all 3 North Shore municipalities and the 2 local First Nations who worked collaboratively on a project to understand their risk and to begin to chart actions for how to move forward to protect communities, their communities working together. I think of the Resilient Waters project that I'm involved with some of you in the room. This is a project to look specifically at an issue that is around the impact of our flood structures, our flood control structures on fish and fish habitat, and trying to identify priority projects where we can actually implement solutions to improve fish passage, improve fish habitat. And we're trying to work to research the issue, share knowledge, identify priorities, and then move those projects forward. And that is, again, with a number of different communities in this room. And then we've also touched on some of the recent collaborations that have emerged after the November Atmospheric River event, November 2021 Atmospheric River event. So the collaboration that's happening in the Sumas Prairie, the Sumas River area, the area where historically was Sumas Lake. And there's also watershed based recovery work happening that the province has recently funded in another number of areas as well. So this sort of emerging sub-regional collaboration, I think, presents examples of that we can look to for how this could work and how we might move forward. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on what our coalition has thought about in terms of potential opportunities for regional collaboration. Again, I think this concept of critical infrastructure and essential services has been touched on already this morning. So things like our major roads, our highways, making sure those are resilient in the face of climate-related events. Looking at our the systems that feed our supply chains, our rail lines, our energy systems and electrical grid, our communication services that we rely on, especially in the event of an emergency, and all of those other essential services that support our well-being, our ways of life, and our communities, hospitals, fire halls. So we think that this is a really important theme that we could discuss more of today. We've also talked a lot about projects that provide flood risk reduction, but also restore habitat for an environmental gain. Things like naturalizing floodplains or restoring wetlands. These are projects that are a priority of the coalition as well. And Bob Carey, who's here, is going to speak next and talk a little bit about how this is playing out south of the border in Washington State. And then I've left a question mark because I think the group here today, what else do we want to include in our regional priorities? I think there's an opportunity to discuss that as a group soon in this session, and we look forward to hearing from you about what your priorities are and what we might add to this list of regional priorities. And on that note, I think, Bob, you were going to go next. Eric, are you going to introduce it? Okay. Yeah.
Just to be clear on the principles and the objectives around critical infrastructure and local essential services. If you think of it in the context that you're cognizant of our principles, if you're doing and wanting to do something that aligns with those principles here and now, we're not saying, no, you can't do that. You have to wait for a plan. If it aligns with our principles, fly at it. Because that ultimately, sooner than later, we want a regional plan that's strategic and collaborative in nature. So think of that going forward, because there is funding available right here and now that each and every one of us should be taking advantage of. But let's do it in a manner that aligns with what it is that we're presenting here, because then there'll be fewer rubs going forward. So I want to be explicit that it may take us a little while to ultimately be at a point where we're actually signing off on design, signing off on what is regional critical infrastructure. And I maintain it'll take between 10 and $20 million just to do a cost analysis of what it will take to make critical infrastructure essential services resilient. And then from there, it'll probably take $5 to $7 billion to do it. But I would argue that when all of us go to Minister Blair asking for $7 billion, the negotiations isn't about how much. The negotiations is about how quickly can we get it, because we're not going to get it in one day overnight, right? So the idea of aligning with the principles, being strategic, being aware of what your neighbors are doing, because we'd like everybody to align with these and similar, and some principles that you're going to raise in conversation here. But it's that alignment is critical going forward. So I'd ask you to keep that in mind.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, let's keep that in mind. We're going to hear from Bob Carey next, who is the Strategic Partnerships Director for the Nature Conservancy south of the border here in Washington. And he brings over 20 years experience working in this area, particularly focusing on community empowerment, building partnerships and taking innovative approaches. And we're going to hear from him about the Floodplains by Design initiative, which is really doing this. And I think to what Tyrone was saying, you know, this is moving forward in various ways at various time scales, at various geographic scales. And so bringing that awareness and starting to think about how could that all be happening at the same time? Yes, we want to take a region-wide approach, and how do all the other pieces move forward and align with these principles to move forward as a whole? So over to Bob.
Good morning. As Erica said, my name is Bob. I use he, him pronouns, and I hail from the Skagit Valley in Washington, the traditional lands of the Skagit and Swinomish people and other Coast Salish peoples. And it's an honor to be here today on Sq'eqeyl and Solo First Nation land as a visitor and to speak to all of you. And as Erica said, yeah, one of the great pleasures of my career has been the opportunity to be part of the Floodplains by Design public-private partnership in Washington. Go ahead, Dan, for the last number of years. And I was asked to speak to what some of the challenges that we've experienced on the landscape were, what the approach is that we've developed to addressing those challenges, and what are some of the benefits or examples of the approach that we've tried to engender there. Next slide, Dan. So short story in terms of problem, this is just an example. This is actually from the Skagit River where I'm from, a situation. If you look at this aerial photo of the floodplain, you can see that this was once a very dynamic reach of the Skagit River by all the oxbow and such that are on that landscape. And this is in fact the most productive Chinook spawning reach in the entire Puget Sound system, the Southern Salish Sea. Huge percentage of the Chinook salmon that come out of the Skagit River and Puget Sound as a whole come from this reach. And the Nature Conservancy and a whole bunch of local tribal state federal partners has been working to protect that floodplain area and all that productive salmon and wildlife habitat for like 40 or 50 years now. But at the same time that's occurred, there's a highway that runs through there on the left side of the river that is the only highway that goes up in North Cascades National Park and gets you to Eastern Washington in the northern part of the state. So really important amenity, and they've had a series of floods that the response has been to armor that really important transportation corridor. And the result is, you can sort of see it on this picture, is it's turn this once meandering stream where all the water, those flood waters and sediments were able to spread out and slow down into a much more channelized straight river with higher velocity and more recurring flood damages. So it's just this, so it's just an example of how working in these siloed ways just doesn't work for anyone, right? Nobody did anything wrong. This is just how our floodplain management systems have been set up. We deal with flooding over here, we deal with habitat over here, we deal with agriculture over there, etc. And it just doesn't work. Next slide. And that's the, you know, the overall challenge is that in these floodplain areas, we have an assortment of interests and communities that are all affected by the same processes, flooding and climate change and the like, but we develop these siloed or fragmented systems to plan for what we're going to do with them and what should happen on the ground. And the result is we have, you know, competing science, we have these duplicated planning efforts. And at the end of the day, no one's really getting ahead. I think this picture is great because it just indicates how you know, this isn't working for anyone, right? If you're a fish, you don't want to be spawning there. If you're a farmer, you don't want to be trying to grow crops on that ground that's flooding repeatedly. If you're the homeowner, you can't get to your house. And if you're the taxpayer, you're shoveling out millions of dollars for all these different things. And meanwhile, flood risks and damages continue to increase. Salmon stocks continue to decrease. We continue to lose viable farmland. So it's like, it's not working. And all those interests are really facing the same problem, right? There's not enough money to go around, and we're working at odds with one another. Sometimes that working at cross purposes is like a social or political thing where there's opposition. Sometimes it's legal, there's lawsuits sometimes to stop projects from happening that have been developed in silos. But sometimes there's actually stuff happening on the ground, like the example I just showed, where we're doing good things for one objective in ways that's undermining the other things that we as a broader society care about. Next slide. So FBD, Floodplains by Design, is you know, we really set about creating this partnership with the state and a network of local, state, federal government and tribal nations to change the floodplain management paradigm. So we're not planning and focusing on silos, but rather our goals are to significantly reduce flooding, significantly restore salmon runs, significantly address the needs of agriculture, recreation, and the other things that might manifest in the community. Next. And these are our principles. They're almost verbatim what Patrick just shared of the Lower Fraser Floodplain Coalition, right? This work has to be locally driven. The players, the interests, and the physical characteristics of every place are different. You need collaboration. This isn't about having public input meetings or doing outreach. It's about really bringing the people to the table and building trust and engaging them in the decision-making processes. It's inclusive and reconciliation. On my table placard, it talks about the importance, is one of the quotes from the last convening, of bringing First Nations in early and engaging them in the decision-making. So floodplains by design, there's a major funding source that comes along with it. You need to have tribal support in order to get that funding. Tribes have veto authority. That was pretty revolutionary at the time, but as Tyrone, you said, that's becoming more commonplace. That is the future. And the co-equal goals, we talk about multiple benefits. And just to be really clear, this floodplains by design is not a flood program where we're trying to do things in an environmental sensitive way. Nor is it a habitat restoration program in which we're trying to create some flood storage. This is about seriously moving the needle on both those fronts, because otherwise we're setting ourselves up to undermine each other or compete for limited dollars. And it's about working at scale. So much of the work historically has happened, site by site, municipality by municipality. We're talking about systems here. Flooding occurs on large landscapes. We need to manage at that scale, and we need to be future oriented, not depending on flood maps that were developed 20 years ago. Next slide. So the way that this manifests, these are like the 10 elements of integrated floodplain management that we developed. And you probably can't read this very well, but basically there's like some indicators of where you are, how well you're doing on each of those. And the way this manifests is, generally speaking, you have a convener and facilitator of these collaborative processes. It's generally a regional government, but not always. Sometimes it's a tribe, what we call tribal nations, a First Nation, or a conservation district, or somebody that's the convener. They bring the people together, make sure the right people are at the table. You work through an alignment around vision and goals. You build in decision-making processes, right? Where very transparent, clear decision-making process about how you're going to share in decisions. And then you do the technical work and the planning and the project selection and design in that collaborative process and at a basin scale. And I'll give you a couple examples of that next. So the Sq'eq'o, we tried to get the Sq'eq'o folks to come up here. They just weren't able to make it, but hopefully another opportunity we will bring them. So this is, you've heard about a little bit just across the border, that also experienced significant flooding a year and a half ago. Next. But with some FVRD support, they've created what's called the FLIP process. FLIP stands for Floodplain Integrated Planning Effort, essentially. They have a whole assortment of local, state, federal, tribal, environmental, agricultural partners at this. I think there's 33 entities now that are part of this process. Next. So it's complicated, right? It's not easy, right? As has been said. And this is their general structure, right? They have the regional government's staff team, and then a steering committee that includes the tribes, agricultural partners in the cities. And then small team, because they're working at a basin scale. So they divvied it up into reaches, and they're doing the planning around each one. Next. And this is just to give you a quick flavor of what this looks like. So their process essentially is they do a bunch of the technical work at that basin scale. The hydrodynamic modeling and that kind of thing makes sense to do at a basin scale, but then they break up into these reach teams where they're trying to figure out, okay, what are the real problems we have here? What are the goals we can agree on? What are the projects that might address those multiple needs? How do we prioritize them? So that work's done at the reach level, but then you have this overarching body, that the flip steering committee, that looks to make sure you're not doing things in one reach that are going to undermine what's happening downstream or upstream, et cetera. So that structure is in place. Next. Just go to the next one, Dan. So a couple of years ago, this was before the flood, the Lummi Indian Nation conducted a blanketing ceremony. As some of you are probably aware, this is a pretty special blanket ceremony, one I've never experienced, one I've never seen happen in a situation like this. But the Lummi tribe blanketed the members of the flip steering committee. So the cities, the county, the agricultural groups, like that is unprecedented. These groups have been at odds with one another for decades and some pretty, intense conflict at time. But what comes from that, this is what I would call, adaptive capacity or social capital. In the wake of the flood a year and a half ago, they're like moving stuff because they spend all this time doing the technical work, building the trust. And talking to Paula, who leads this whole thing, she's like, oh my God, like she's been there for a couple decades. Like we're talking about stuff that never would have been possible before. They're buying up dozens of properties, looking at some long-term resilient solutions that will really serve the long-term interests of these different communities. They're not just putting things back the way they were, putting Band-Aids on things. It's pretty extraordinary. Next. Another example down on the White River. This is down by near Tacoma, Washington. And you can just hit it again, Dan. This is a much more urban part of Puget Sound, right? This is a major warehouse district. You have many brands that you're probably familiar with, companies, Costco, Amazon, McDonald's, Lululemon, Helly Hansen have processing distribution centers there. It's a big warehouse district with significant flood risks. So they spent years developing a plan. That's the blue line is the river corridor. There's dikes on either side of it. And they put forth a proposal to the state of Washington in 2015 to get money to raise those dikes because of the flood risks to this area that has huge amount of economic value. Well, it got shut down because of the opposition. So I'll just leave it at that. Next. So they realized that was working in a silo that way was a non-starter, right? So they went back to the drawing board. They invited the tribal nations in who were some of the principal objectors to what they had proposed, which was basically going to be, bigger dikes and more development in really high risk areas. And the regional government to, sort of reset and rethink things. Next slide. And as they started to do the planning, this is some of the technical work they've done. This is a cross section of the White River as it flows through Sumner and just shows the amount of sediment deposition they've been having because you have this very constrained system. And so it's all just accumulating in the river bottom. Well, building dikes higher when you have that phenomenon happening is not a long-term resilience building solution, right? Next. So what they've come up with, here's an aerial that gives you a sense of what that looks like. And so next slide. This is a depiction of what their new proposal is, and that has now been fully funded. They're going forward. They're giving the river more room for that sediment and such to spread out. It's going to create dramatically better flood resilience. But guess what? You get a whole bunch of habitat in that area now that are going to be better for the salmon runs and other species. And the city residents have a greenway right next door. Next. Well, they've built out from that original suite of partners as this work continues to build on itself, right? So now they have this whole larger collection of partners that are involved in the work that includes the water authority, the port, other cities, environmental groups, etc. Next slide. And now they have this plan that goes from, the dam up in the headwaters all the way down with 8 major multi-million-dollar projects to move these things forward. So it's just like they went from not being able to move anything to doing a couple $100 million of work. It's really quite impressive. Next. So FVRD started in 2013, and when we first put out a solicitation after talking with tons of folks in the region for some representative multi-benefit projects, we had a really hard time coming up with things that we could really say, these are truly multi-beneficial. They're really going to move the needle on flood, fish, and farm. Next slide. But since that time, as this approach has been socialized, it's just taken off, and we can't keep up with the demand, even though this FVRD program has kicked out several $100 million of funding in the last decade. There's just dozens of projects happening across the state now, and as was said before, it's not easy, right? Building a Big Ten and pulling these different interests and nations together doesn't mean the conflict goes away. Doesn't mean it's easy. It's still hard, but they're getting major stuff done. Most of these dots on the map represent like reach or watershed scale projects. So it's not just a single site scale project. There's actually a handful or two of on the ground project work, construction happening in each of those sites. Next. So Minister Ma, nice quote. So yeah, so it's hard, but it really works, right? And so some of the outcomes for the first decade of work are over 70 river miles have been restored. There's reduced flood risks in 63 communities. Thousands of acres of farmland have been protected or had some infrastructure improvements, et cetera. And I would just say, like, those are nice numbers, but what's compelling to me is when I show up in the state legislature with the Washington Farmland Trust, and they say this approach in FVRD has been a game changer for farmland preservation. When I hear these regional floodplain managers and engineers talk about how after years of seeing increasing flood damages and risks, they have hope that they can actually get ahead of this and reverse that trend. When I talk to a tribal natural resource director who says, Bob, like this has been a game changer for our salmon recovery efforts because of the pace and scale at which we're now working. So, like, again, it's hard. I don't want to put too rosy of a polish on this because there's real hard work that happens to get this stuff done. But the pace and scale of what's unfolding is pretty inspiring. And I'll just say that as some of my colleagues that are part of the Lower Fraser Floodplain Coalition know, like, I love coming up here and working with this team because for a few reasons. One, the Fraser River is clearly the most important economically, ecologically, and culturally river system in the Salish Sea. But two, because like the progress that's being made from the good work of you. And I mean, the evolution of conversation that's happening here that you see today from when I first came up here 4 years ago is really significant. And the principles that you've identified, those are what we put into place essentially in Washington, and they work. They really are a game changer. So thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Bob. We brought Bob into the program to hopefully illustrate and inspire, and I hope that it's done that to really bring this to life. So we've been talking about all sorts of context, all sorts of ideas, but this is on the ground what we're imagining and what we want to be working towards. So just wanted to bring that into our attention. So we're going to go into our conversations. As I said, the rest of the day is going to be largely just us in conversations. And so thank you for making it through the morning and all the ways that we wanted to equip you to go into these conversations in an informed way, understanding what some of the key parts are that different folks are bringing to this conversation so that we can start from that shared place of a relatively shared picture. So what we're going to do now is we've got about 45 minutes in our groups. If you're looking at the time, that means we're going to go to close to 12:30 and then we're going to take a break for lunch for about 45 minutes. So so that's the first piece. And what we're going to be talking about, there's actually, I'll just mention right now, this front table, I'm going to give you some instructions on moving to some other tables to join the conversations. And I think otherwise we're managing, I think Megan, you're coming over here. Okay, so so there's going to be a couple of little adjustments as we ensure that everyone is at a table with a facilitator and note taker, but we've got you covered. And yes, so you will have a facilitator and note taker. They will guide you through this process, but just to give you a bit of orientation, we're going to have 3 rounds of discussion. You're going to stay at the same table for this one. In future rounds, you'll get to switch around to other tables, but you're going to get a chunk of time here to really sit with the folks who you're with and listen deeply to one another. As Bob was saying, this is a really foundational part of what we're doing here, and understanding where everyone is coming from is where we want to start this today. So in the first round of conversation, you'll introduce yourselves first, and just mention that in the first round of introductions, please keep this very short and know that we've got then lots of room for you to share. And we're going to start with hearing your priorities. What is your community concerned about, your priorities and challenges? So in that round of introductions, let's keep that really tight. So your name, your organization, and what are we asking you here? Your favorite food. So just a really quick round of introductions. Another mention is that your facilitator, if you see your facilitator place their hand on their heart, this is a signal to you, if you're speaking, of thank you for what you've shared, and that it's time to bring your piece to a close. As I mentioned before, we really want to get around and hear from everyone at your table. So please be watching for that signal from your facilitator, which will tell you that it's time to close up what you're speaking of and move on to the next person. So before we do that, I'll invite Minister Ma to share her reflections and what she's taking back.
Well, thank you so much. I am so incredibly grateful for the opportunity to have heard several of your tables. I'm sorry I didn't manage to make it to every single table, but such wonderful conversations and presentations as well. I heard a few key items. I mean, I'm not going to provide all of my reflections because I know that you're running a bit of short on time, so I'll try to be brief. But one of the pieces that I heard that really stuck out to me, that I heard at multiple tables, was the interest in partnerships and the dialogue around partnerships as both opportunities and challenges. The recognition of the incredible opportunities that exist when we all work together, but also acknowledgement that it is very challenging, that working together is hard. But you know what? We can do hard things, and I've seen it done. And when we put our minds to it, when we come to the table with open hearts and open minds, it really does enable those hard conversations to bring us to better places in the future. I also heard a lot about funding and the recognition that funding streams are, they're helpful in the short term, but a desire to have long-term funding opportunities that kind of center around like holistic plans. And that's something that we're doing in SUMAS as well. The idea that if we develop an overall plan together, and then we kind of set it, and we can build our funding kind of the funding map around it, and then focus the rest of our time on implementing. So you do the upfront hard conversations, develop the plans, and then we're able to kind of focus on the implementation, actually get that action through. I also heard a few tables talk about the the relationship between all of this work and food security and the role of farmers and producers in that, and how important it is for them to also be at the table and be a part of that work. Aside from that, a lot of the discussions were very similar to the presentation, so I won't rehash it, but I will maybe end with an overall reflection of what I've heard today. So yesterday I had the great honor to speak to all the staff at EMCR virtually. And one of the questions that I was asked was, Minister, what does a resilient BC look like to you? What does that mean to you? And at the time I had kind of given a very very bullet point answer, like every British Columbian has a emergency kit and a grab and go bag. And we have infrastructure that can withstand the what climate change throws at us in terms of extreme weather. And all of that is true. But on hearing the presentations and the conversation, I want to share with you the answer that I wish that I had given, which is that we are in a place that a resilient BC is where we get to a place where we're not afraid of what Mother Nature is throwing at us, because we're working with her and not against her. And that we're building our communities in a way that understands how nature works instead of fighting it. And I think that's what a resilient BC will look like, where we're understanding what it is that is coming at us and actually building to accept it and to work with it. And I know that a lot of the conversations that I've heard around the table kind of speak to that. So thank you so much. Grateful to all of you, and again to our hosts here in Sq'eq'o territory.
Thank you so much, Minister. Really appreciate you taking the time to be here and to share with the room, and particularly to reflect what you've heard. It's an important part that we know that what's being shared is actually landing. So thank you so much. So we're going to break for lunch. We'll be back at 1:15. And before we do that, I'll invite Elder Wendy Ritchie to provide a prayer and blessing of the food.
S.A.Y. Just going to leave the floor open for a minute, for a moment of silence for J. Hope and his family. So pray in your own way. And with that, I'm going to sing my great-grandfather's eagle song. So just imagine the eagle flying, taking your prayers to the creator of all good things. Oh, 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 hey, oh, hey, Oh, 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 Creator, we give thanks for the food that's provided to us today. We ask in a good way, in a humble way, to take care of our rooted, to take care of our winged, to take care of the four-legged, and to take care of the finned. And we give thanks for the nurturing that they give us today. With this, I say all my relations, S.A.Y, Sq'eq'o. Enjoy your meal.
All right, hope you had a good lunch and got to connect with some folks. That's often one of the best parts of these days, of course. So what we're going to be doing now is that we're going from the conversation we just had. These folks have been madly gathering that all together and turning it into 5 key regional issues that we're going to talk about now in this next round of discussion. And so I'm going to hand it over to Gillian and Deb, who are going to let you know what those are, and then I'll come back to give you instructions for this next conversation.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the chili and bannock. I heard the chili was spicy, which is nice. So now we are really, we're really getting going here on the action side of things, and we're going to talk about putting the 5 principles into action. And you've already done some work this morning, and Gillian and I, with the help of our colleagues, have been going through that over lunch and coming up with some topics for you to really sink your teeth into now. So by way of background, I'm Deb Carlson. I'm a staff lawyer at West Coast Environmental Law, and I'm working on the Lower Fraser Floodplains coalitions with my illustrious colleagues. Closer and louder. Okay. All right. So talking about putting the 5 principles into action. So we wanted to reinforce, and I especially wanted to reinforce this point too, speaking as a lawyer, that this is a good place to be where we are now. The legal landscape is shifting, and that means the law and policy landscape. And it's really, I think, aligned with the opportunities we have here in the Lower Fraser if we work together. But there's a lot of moving pieces, and if we can get ready and we can start to define what we want to do for our region, we can easily start plugging it into these initiatives that are out there at the federal and provincial level. And also obviously aligns very well if we're working collaboratively and respectfully with the implementation of the declaration. And as we heard, that's real, that's happening, it's moving. So just wanted to reiterate, you heard already about the provincial flood strategy. You heard about the emergency management legislation coming forward. This is so exciting. In my lifetime as a lawyer, I haven't seen this kind of change happening. I've seen some negative changes actually at the federal level a few years back, but I haven't seen this kind of positive change. This is a really special moment for us. So we can make use of it here in our region. Especially looking at the declaration, if you haven't looked at it, really do give it a read. And we recommend looking at articles 18, 19, 29, there's a few more there, 32. This really gives us a toolbox for how we can work together and guides us in thinking about what that means to work together, to do the work of reconciliation. And I realize in BC, local governments in particular haven't had that type of guidance. It's going to come, I think, from the province. We've had some case law that suggested that local governments really don't have a duty to consult. And I think that's kind of held us back a bit in our relationship building. But now we can go forward. We have the declaration to rely on, and it's coming. And so some of you already are building those relationships, but just keep going. Let's see, federally, we do have now a national adaptation strategy. And I just wanted to mention 2 particular things that have come out of that national adaptation strategy. The first is a priority around resilient infrastructure. And so one of the things that's in the strategy is that public and private infrastructure decision-making is informed by system-wide assessments of and planning for climate risks. This is something that's very relevant for our region, and it's a priority for the federal government. And our region, being a center of trade and commerce, is also a priority for the federal government. And the adaptation strategy is being translated into a federal action plan, and the federal action plan is being translated into funding. So this is the line that goes through to funding and getting funding for our region. But again, as everyone is saying, we need to have a plan for what we're doing. So we need to work together to get the plan. For example, all new investments in infrastructure will apply resilience criteria and adopt climate change guidance, standards, and future design data to maximize the long-term benefits of infrastructure outcomes. This is what's going to be required in federal funding. Another area of focus that we haven't talked so much about this morning, a bit at the tables, it's definitely in the 5 principles, is nature and biodiversity. There's an aquatics Ecosystems Restoration Fund, there's a Natural Climate Solutions Fund, $4 billion. That's for the whole country, but still that's a lot of money, and that's just the first round of investing. So this is coming forward, these opportunities, but like everything, it takes time to build relationships, it takes time to build plans, so we need to move forward with this. And then finally, I just wanted to comment on the disaster financial assistance at the federal level. There was an expert panel that produced a report that came out last year, and they had some really interesting recommendations. We don't know for sure where that's going yet, but it's in a direction that would be really beneficial for us. They talked about supporting integrated planning for resilience. They talked about a new stream of funding for pre-disaster measures. So not just recovery, but getting ahead of things. So we don't have to wait for an event like 2021 to get a large injection of funding into our region. We can start planning ahead. And finally, also incentivizing nature-based approaches. So I'm going to pass it over to Gillian now. And I just want to make that point, though, that the wind is behind you. You have lots of work, but from a legal and policy perspective, all systems are moving in the right direction.
Okay, next slide, please. Awesome, thank you. So that said, the wind is behind us, but we have a lot of work to do. So this is a picture of, I believe this is the 100-year flood with 2100. Is that correct, Dan? Yes. Sorry? 200-year flood, 2100. So this is the current estimate of how much of our lower mainland will be flooded should that happen. The other thing to take a note about is the equitable distribution of that water. So we know, I believe the last time EPS did a look at First Nations communities in the lower mainland, we found about 75% would be flooded by just a 100-year flood without climate change. So 200-year flood with climate change would make that a whole lot worse. In fact, I think there was a recent report that came out that suggested that 4% of Canadians are at risk of flooding, but 90% of First Nations are at risk of flooding across the whole country. It's quite a bit. So just keep that in mind when you're having your conversations today. This is not something we can ignore. Okay, next slide. Now we're going to talk about what we're going to do next. So as you can see, some of you have these nice blue placards on your table. So what we're going to do is we've taken some of the key issues that you've brought up this morning, and we've separated them out into 5 discussion groups. So these different discussion groups are around different tables. So if you don't like the one that you're at, you can move around. That's okay. But these issues are, and I want to start by saying, we're not talking about funding. So we know we all need funding. So funding is not one of the things that we're going to talk about, or it's not a table, and it's not one of the things we're going to talk about because we know that we need it. We know we need more funding. What we have heard from the province is we need a plan to get funding. So now we need to decide what's going to be in that plan. So that's the conversation today. So the number 1 is talking about number 1, critical infrastructure and local essential services. So this is essentially what can't get wet. What shouldn't get wet? Highway 1 might be a good example. So what can't get wet and how do we, so A, what are these things? What can't get wet? And then B, how do we protect them? Number 2, is our collaboration process. So planning, policy, decision-making, how are we working together? But more importantly, how do we plan together? How do we get to that point of sort of, what do you need to do this? What do you need to come to the table? How do we get to the point of planning together? So that can include things like who needs to be there? How are we coming together? How do we build trust to get to that point? That kind of stuff. There was also a good conversation around education, so that would fit into that box as well. And incentives. Yes, and incentives. Incentives are also a big part. What incentives do you need to get you to the table? Number 3 is understanding risks and trade-offs. So in that map that I just showed, we can acknowledge that something is going to get wet. We can't protect everything, unfortunately, because we don't have the money for it. I think we've heard that loud and clear from the federal government. So understanding what risks, what are the risks? How do we come to terms with these risks? What do we still need to know about risks? And then how do we decide what those trade-offs are? What is going to get wet versus what's not going to get wet? That might be a hard one. There's more coffee though, if you need it for that conversation. The fourth one is food security. So we have a really interesting group here today. We have a lot of people representing different farming groups. We also have quite a few people who are involved in biology or First Nations who very much prioritize their land and their fish. So we wanted to have a conversation around how do we balance, or what does the coexistence look like between prioritizing both fish and food security, agriculture and flood management in our region? How do all of those things work together? So for farmers, that could be, what do you need to be part of the floodplain? If you're not protected, what do you need to be outside of the dike? Or if you are protected, why do you need to be protected? Are there some types of farming that can be protected and some types that aren't? And how do we make that equation work for you, to quote Dave Zender? The last one is restoration of land and creating space for the river. So we have a giant floodplain. We've constrained our river into a very small box with our dikes. We want to pull those dikes back, as we've shown from, where is Bob? Bob's examples down south of us. So what does that look like in this area? How do we get water storage that we sorely need to reduce that peak flow? And that also gives us biodiversity returns. So that conversation is going to happen at that table. All right, I have no information on time, but go ahead, start. Thank you. Oh, wait, Erica.
Don't move yet. Okay, so I'm just gonna talk us through how this is gonna work. So these are the 5 topics, and I just want to go around the room and we'll let you know where the topics are. So just noticing from this list, you're going to get a chance to talk about up to 2. We're going to have 2 rounds of conversation here. So you can stay at the same topic for both rounds if you're really into that topic, but you can choose up to 2. So just thinking about what those 2 might be as you look at this list. And then I'm going to name these out, and if facilitators, please note the blue sign that you have at your table and put up your hand when I call the topic that's at your table so folks can see where it is. So just paying attention to where these tables are so you can find them later. So number 1 is critical infrastructure and local essential services. So Hazel and Megan over here are doing critical infrastructure and local essential services. Okay. Planning, policy, and decision making. So Case and Erica at the back of the room here, they've got that one. Understanding risks and trade-offs. So we've got 3 tables for this. We have Holly, Jackie, and Alyssa here in the middle of the room. Okay. Food security, the front 2 tables up in this corner. And restoration of land and creating space for the river in the back corner. Stuck them all in the corner over there so you don't pay attention to this one. No, that one's really important. Make sure you get to those tables. Okay, so those are the topics. So you have a sense in your mind of where you might go. So what we're going to do is, can you go to the next slide, please, Dan? Just explain how this is going to work. So we're going to have 2 rounds, about 20 minutes in each round. In the first conversation, you're going to come to the table and you're going to talk about this one specific topic, critical infrastructure, say. And you're going to talk about what would the goals be that we want to aim at for this topic as a region. And not just that, but you want to hold in mind these 5 principles that we've been referring to all day. So this is where these are really going to come into play. And there's the handouts at those tables if you want a refresher on what those are, but you want to look across all of those principles. So if we're looking at critical infrastructure and we want to implement these principles, what does advancing reconciliation mean for this topic? What would the goals be under advancing reconciliation for this topic? What would the goals be for everyone is part of the solution, etc.? So working across all of those 5 principles. This is laid out on your table, so hopefully that will help you to orient to that question. So round 1, what are the goals for this topic? Then I'll let you know that we're completed 20 minutes or so. And then come to round 2 will be, what are the barriers and opportunities around this topic, around reaching those goals that we've identified? So you can switch tables. The facilitator will fill you in on what the goals are that have been identified. And then your conversation will be about barriers and opportunities. So round 1, goals, round 2, barriers and opportunities. It's a little complex, this one, but we hope that we've set it up in a way that's going to be pretty clear at your tables. Feel free to ask your facilitator for clarity if you're needing it. All right. So we're going to have one last conversation in just a little bit. Before we do that, we're going to hear back from Michelle, who has been doing these beautiful graphics as we've been talking, reflecting what she's been hearing. So we're just going to turn to her for a few minutes, and then we're going to hear a report back from each of the topics that you guys have been discussing from the facilitators. And Dan, are you ready with the sharing? Almost there. Okay.
Thanks everyone for allowing me to be your witness today. Yeah, it was really heard some really good discussion, and while Dan's loading the image, it's actually going to be a video showing the process of the drawing. Because of the digital format of the drawings, that's it's nice so you can see how I drew it. But I'll just start off while Dan's loading that. I'll just tell you a little bit about my process, and I was able to share with a couple of you, but just to share with the wider group, my background is in public policy. I have a master's in public policy from SFU. And so, oh, it's loading. Awesome. So I'll divert your attention over to the to the screen. That's the best part. But the reason why I really enjoy this medium is because there's been so much talk of inclusion of Indigenous people today. Part of the reason why in having a policy background that I like to do this work is to engage our communities. So to use it as a tool to better engage our community members that often aren't able to be at these tables. So to share them widely. Imagery and art is something that can unite us all. So this is the reason that I really like this as a policy tool. And it kind of just fits with my background. So with all that said, I just wanted to share what I've drew and why as part of my witnessing today. I drew this kind of land-based image because so much of what we're talking about today is place-based. And as Indigenous people, that's, we are part of the land. The land is us, we are the land. I've heard it many times from my elders, and part of the reason that I also really enjoy this medium is because typically elders and youth really engage with this. So I started off with drawing where we are and being hosted here by the nation, and wanted to just put in on the left side that we had a little bit of history today from Tyrone and Elder Wendy. So thank you both for and other nation members here today who shared with us their connection to this land and the history of this land. And so I really enjoyed that and wanted to, as I was, listening today, I heard a lot about food security and cultural preservation. And the story that Elder Wendy was telling us of the cabin, I wanted to include it, just a little one there, but also the stories from farmers and other folks who've grown up here. So that is just a part of our shared collective history. So wanted to include some of that imagery. And then I also wanted to share just a few pieces, the key policy documents, UNDRIP and DRIPA. And Tyrone kind of focused us this morning on Indigenous people being rights holders, and that we really do have a lot in common when it comes to wanting the same things for the land. And so I put in the water, in the river there, some of the salmon, and you can see that was a key concern. I've heard it a lot today. And wanted to also draw a little bit about the infrastructure. You can see the roadway going beside the river. And that was one of the pieces I heard a lot about as well this morning, having resilience in our infrastructure. And that food production and affordability was something that kept coming up at the tables that I was sitting at. Now I'll kind of bring your attention to, oh, and it's gone, but that's all right. I'll share with you guys some of the part that was in the mountains. So both Tyrone and our elder Wendy Ritchie shared a little bit about the values that they hold on the land, which is to share openly and listen to all voices, and having gratitude for all living beings on the earth, and that being the philosophy of the local people here. Being able to respect the land and share a connection to the land. And another piece that I heard a couple times was being able to work together collaboratively. So breaking down those silos, and also not restructuring how the work is done so that we're not competing for funding. I think there's opportunity, and I heard that again in the afternoon, opportunity for reshaping how we do this work. And then planning on a region-wide scale was kind of moved along nicely with that sentiment, having adapted our plans, being adaptable to climate change, and building on relationships and trust. And that key piece being trust in one another, trust to be able to work together, but also to have all of our needs met. And also the option for keeping traditional plant gathering alive and having spaces to do so. And part of our updates, we had the minister. So part of the way that I do this work is it's not linear. My mind often works in a circular motion. So I kind of populate the image going around the center. That's just kind of how my mind works. And so some of the updates, of course, the new ministry, and having the Lower Fraser Floodplains Coalition updated us on some of the other events they've had since I was last with you in July of 2022. And then bringing groups together. And I keep hearing examples of bringing First Nations and farmers or agriculture folks together, which I'll come back to on the second image. And I really want to pronounce the name of the group that's doing Mainland Coast Salish Framework, but I feel like I may butcher it. But right by the big salmon. Sorry, folks. But I did capture the 4 principles, the 4 key pieces: understanding disaster risk, invest in risk reduction, enhancing preparedness and building back together, build back better together. Oops, I got to add that. Strengthening governance, and some of the key guiding principles included food security and cultural safety, and having resilience in our food structures. And right below the salmon, so another piece that I heard from our friend from Washington was just making sure we're aware of the silos in planning, and they can create confusion and duplication of work. So being careful of avoiding that and breaking down silos and linking all levels of government, including First Nations governments, and having that wider scope of coordination. And so I'll leave it there, and maybe if you're able to put on the second image. It's not quite finished. I'll still be here recording your next discussions. And so while Dan's loading that, I'll just note one of the other pieces that the minister mentioned was taking the time to do this right. And that's why I drew a little clock on the bottom. And I hear that quite a lot from other groups, Indigenous groups. Being able to move at the pace of the speed of community is what I've heard before. All right, so looks like the second one is loaded up. Oh, we got a hat. All right. So this is, again, just showing you the process of the drawing, because when you see it, it's finished, but it's hours and hours of work. So I just want to draw your attention to the pieces that actually take the time. This is how digital graphic recording looks in real time. So for this image, I'll just quickly go over it. I wanted to show the literal collaboration between the people and center your voices in the center, or place your voices literally in the center. So that's really what today is all about. So I mostly sat in on the critical infrastructure and local essential services groups. And so part of that included writing down, I wanted to also include the other tables. So I put them down in the bottom, was able to chat with one of the food security groups. But again, this process isn't, unlike a report, it's not about really capturing everything. It's about kind of the story of what we did here today and the intentions behind this gathering. So some of the stories I heard from the infrastructure group was wanting to protect those main arteries, bridges, highways, hydro lines, cell towers, as some communities were totally cut off during the floods. And so that was a priority for a couple of the groups that I sat in on, but also they were concerned about education on individual levels and as in our community levels. So around preparedness, as well as around salmon and their habitats and how we can restore them, addressing spills, etc., during major events. And so restoring waterways and habitats was another piece that also linked into food security, being able to acknowledge that our waterways are literally feeding all of our food sources here, from salmon to the fields of food that are growing right around us. And so, yeah, this piece, I really just wanted to bring your attention to the land again and the 5 principles that were developed from the last gatherings. And I'll be still building this image, but just wanted to show you the update to this point so that you can see what I've been up to. And I really like the last sentiment I'll leave you with that I've heard is just a willingness among such a diverse group of people to sit down and talk about your similarities, but also what you experienced during the floods. And then having resiliency. I think I saw a lot of willingness for folks to help a neighbor out. So really enjoyed listening to all of you. So thank you so much. Sq'eq'eyl.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm very excited to see the final products as well. Yeah, it is really wonderful to have these stories in visual form to convey a bit of the feeling as well as the content of what happened here today. So really appreciate all your work. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go around the room and just hear from one of the facilitators for each of the topics. So we had 5 of them. We're going to come around and hear from each of them with just a couple of thoughts, sharing from their table about what they heard and some of the key things that came out in that conversation, just to give everyone a bit of a sense of this last part that we just were into. Going around the room, I was getting a little bit of a sense just from looking at folks and hearing a little bit. This was a tough one, I think. Yeah. That took a lot out of folks. So hopefully this last conversation we're going to have is going to bring a bit more energy, because we're going to talk about actions and we'll land on that place today. But thank you for going through that tough spot, and we'll in future phases of this work we'll be building. So this isn't the last step, and this will really inform us in how we move forward and further define this over the next steps. So thank you for doing that tough first level of work. All right, for the first one, I'm going to come to Case at the back. And Case, you guys were doing the policy planning and decision making, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So thank you, Michelle, also for showing that I'm a landscape architect, a visual thinker. So I appreciate really seeing that's captured, our meeting captured in the drawing. So In our table, we had several things that we discussed. First was improved information sharing and data sovereignty across the two groups. I think this was something that came up. We talked a lot about developing protocols for First Nation engagement with local governments and other levels of government, and engaging First Nations early and often within the process. We talked about adopting generational thinking in planning and decision making, and some barriers that we foresaw is how does this overlap with, I think, political cycles, and how can we think about generations ahead, but then not get stopped by these 4-year cycles or sometimes 2-year cycles that we're in. We talked about changing zoning bylaws and policies to be much more responsive to flood management and water management issues. And also the barriers there, like if we're changing land uses, that might have implications on tax bases, and that might have implications on other things that are funded by tax revenues that are currently being generated. And then finally, I think we talked about understanding that there are a lot of different perspectives and worldviews at play, and that there's a critical need for dialogue, like what we're doing today, but who's going to lead that dialogue, and who's going to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard as part of these processes. So those were just a couple of highlights from the two tables, I think, that covered this particular topic. Who do I give the mic to?
Fantastic. Okay, if you can pass that on to Juniper over here. And we're going to hear from Alyssa next, who's going to talk about the understanding risk table. And just to recall that these pieces that we're putting together here, we're really mapping out what are some pieces of a region-wide roadmap, a region-wide framework for what we would work together on. So let's hear about this part.
Hello, I'm gonna stand here so I'm facing most of you. All right, so here's some highlights from 3 different tables. Under understanding risks, what came up was education and awareness for emergency planning and preparedness, also including reconciliation, as well as food security. Advancing reconciliation, we had Indigenous knowledge included in all planning, respecting and recognizing Indigenous jurisdiction both on and off reserve. With thriving salmon and ecosystems, goals were changing water levels and temperatures, fish streams being reconnected to mainstream Fraser River and restoring Sumas Lake. With resilience, communities, and economies, we had looking at alternative use of land that's beneficial in a different way, and identifying First Nation reserves as critical infrastructure. With everyone being part of the solution, we had people being engaged but not overwhelmed, and building consensus, not unanimity. With opportunities and barriers, they were very similar in all the different subject matters. So in principles, opportunities were education, the desire to collaborate, and having more holistic understandings of things, as well as reducing what's not needed. Barriers were slow government processes, funding, greenwashing, and talk with not enough action. So that was the summary of understanding risks and trade-offs. Also, I'm just going to very quickly encourage everyone to get some stretching in because I think that'll help wake you up, whether or not it's your arms or your legs. I'm going to stretch.
Thanks, Alyssa. Yes, and feel free. I see someone at the back doing this. Yes, please. Why don't we all do that right now? Just from where you're sitting, if you want to get up, you can, but stretching your arms and reaching up. Thank you for your reminder that we are in bodies. All right, so Alyssa, if you can share the microphone with Devin after you, and we're going to come to Juniper.
Okay, thank you. So we were the tables talking about restoration of land and creating space for the river. And I felt like it was I feel this immense pressure to do justice to the conversation that was had. My table's laughing. There was a lot of passion over here, and a lot of ideas generated. So I have 3 themes I want to share with you. So the first big theme was the need for river-wide integrated solutions that take a systems approach, and really talking about the complexity of the river system, and that we really need holistic solutions. So we need data to be able to do that. We need to be engaging all different parts of communities, farmers, you know, really ensuring that Indigenous knowledge and self-determined solutions are leading the way. We also talked a lot about the complexity of salmon habitat and water quality in addition to quantity. A second big important piece was the importance of doing this together in partnership. So the notion that many places have been through what we're going through and we can learn from them. And by partnering, we have access to more resources. And finally, by exploring not only risks, but also the benefits of doing this work. And then the third big theme that came up was about the importance of small changes to riparian systems. So not only thinking about removing dikes, which can feel really like a really big change, but also the importance of interventions like resurfacing rivers, adding culverts, thinking about aquifer recharge, and that the cumulative impacts of these changes can be really important and maybe have less negative impact on communities.
Great, thank you. All right, we want to get to the next conversation pretty quickly, so we're just going to come to Devin and then to Megan to hear just quickly 1 or 2 things from your tables as well. Thanks, Devin.
Okay, great. So my table and another table had food security. And one thing that I saw overarching was applying this lens of food security that brings together First Nations and agriculture to work towards a common goal of food security. And so, and also the idea of having public support, like broad public support for the work that everyone is doing in the public eye. And that can look like First Nations having access to places to hunt and gather traditional foods and medicines in collaboration with agriculture, and more support and training for agriculture for better water management, and also compensation for farmers for flooding and ecosystem services. And one of the barriers that was mentioned in both groups was general hesitancy, fear of the unknown, lack of time and resources to do this collaborative work, to work towards reconciliation in particular. But the overarching opportunity is that there are mutually beneficial solutions for everyone here, and this common goal of food security for everyone in the region.
All right, and just some closing thoughts here from the Critical Infrastructure and Local Essential Services Group.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I think that critical infrastructure was already touched on a little bit, so I'll just kind of brush over quickly. I think that a lot of our principles landed under reconciliation with Indigenous communities and having open communication, dialogue with these communities, in understanding history to avoid making the same mistakes, and also in understanding how to build better infrastructures by learning from Indigenous communities. We also have learning the risks from Indigenous communities about flooding and such. And so just kind of creating relationships and connections with the Indigenous communities around you. And in regard to salmon as well. I'm so sorry. I didn't hear what was shared about critical infrastructures already.
No, that's fine. That's
so
great.
I'll end right
That's
there.
perfect.
Thank you so much.
You were busy trying to come up with what you were going to share. Thank you, Megan. Perfect. Okay. So just a taste of what's being shared around the room today. And we're going to go into the final conversation here before we wrap up for the day around goals and actions. So we're going to have about 30 minutes here, might be just slightly less, at one table. So you're back with your sub-regional folks. If your table has shrunk, I notice we've lost some people here in the afternoon. So if it's shrunk, feel free to double up some tables in the same region, or just have a smaller, more intimate conversation in this last part of the afternoon. And there's going to be two parts to what we share. I'm going to just share a little bit of a prompt with you, and that's around where are we going to be 10 years from now? So really taking our minds to envision, where do we want to go? What's the direction we want to head in? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And thinking 10 years out. It's not 7 generations, but it's something. And then the second conversation is going to be, so how did we get there? And talking about what kind of actions in the next 1 to 2 years might set us off in that direction. So on the next slide, please. So the invitation here, and you're welcome to close your eyes as long as you're not going to nod off here, but you're welcome to if that's where you go. There is chocolate and candy on your tables, I believe. That's intentional. All right. So closing your eyes if you'd like, and just imagining that it is 10 years from now. It's 2033. And beginning with the key regional issues that we've been talking about here this afternoon, we've been working together to implement a region-wide approach to flood resilience based on the 5 principles. We've been coming together, it's been 10 years. As we've been doing this work, the support has been growing, and 10 years from now, we're seeing some progress happen. So 10 years from now, what is in place? What's changed? All right. Thank you so much. So we'll be gathering together everything that you've shared during all the discussions, this last one and all the others, and putting that together in a report. Gillian will tell you about that in a few minutes, but before we go there, we have Diane Garner, who's going to lead you in a closing piece here.
Diane Garner, West to Adams Lake to Sq'eq'o. I'm really honored to be here today, and has everyone had an amazing day? Yeah, awesome. So often I get to share my life journey up until now, and I think of what brought us all together here today. So I want everyone, if you can grab a piece of paper and a pen. Does everyone have a piece of paper and a pen? Debbie's going, oh no, I've heard, she's done this before. So I'm while you're grabbing your piece of paper and pen, I am so grateful to be the emergency capacity coordinator with EPS and honored to work with the emergency planning or program coordinators and leadership. So I don't know if they've been acknowledged today, but if you're emergency planning coordinator or part of mainland Coast Salish community here, supporting them whatever way, if you want to raise your hands, probably how many of our communities are here. So just want to acknowledge our mainland Coast Salish emergency program coordinators and leadership. All right. So does everyone have their piece of paper and pen? Check. So we get to have some fun because I'm all about fun. Those that know me. Actually, I'm Ken, and Ken remembers when I was in the Southwest Prioc on Fridays when I got to be there. We always got to do some sort of fun activity like the chicken dance or the hokey pokey, just to do that self-care piece. So if with your pen and paper, if you could draw your house that you live in, whatever it looks like, there's no competition. No one will look at your drawing, that this drawing is for you. So draw your house. And then draw who's in your home. Stick people is fine. And your stick pets. And then around your home, yes, if some you have a garage or some trees, flowers. And then around your home, just what's your community or what's close to your home. You can put your car, trailers, boats, ATVs, whatever you want. This again, this picture's for you. You don't need to share it with anyone. It's quiet. When's the last time anyone did drawings? Just put something that's significant. It's your home. Maybe it's for our community's members' home. Maybe it's the home you stay in is not one, but two, but three generations. Maybe for our mainland Coast Salish communities that are here, it's your grandparents' home or your parents' home, or beside you are your grandparents or your family. Anything you want. You can put mountains if you're by a creek. Maybe you might put for our communities, acknowledging your community halls, your longhouses, where you gather. And then once you're done that, something that in my journey I've been gifted with is who has been someone significant to me? Who is someone that is my teacher, my elder, someone that's helped me to get me to the point that I am today, looking after community, looking after my family? Who is that one person? You can write their name. I think this is a moment that we're here as one. We think of all of our time together and sharing and all the planning that you did, the sharing from not only who you are and the gift you carry and the role that you have in the organization or community, but you bring with you your teachings, your knowledge, and your gifts. And was there that significant person that helped teach you? Why is it that you chose the role or the career path that you have? I'm guessing for most of us here, it's about looking after others or looking after community. So is everyone done? You got that? So while we're just wrapping up, I just want you to just sit for a moment and for those of you, maybe you've chosen that special person or loved one that is significant to you, just to sit with them and think about them and just to honor that moment. So with that, if you just look around the room and you look at all the stickies and all the hard work that you did today, yes, each of you have your own homes and you have who's in your home, your pets. But today, the work we did, all our homes are together. They're all one. We're all here together, and just think of in the work that I do after my journey with the Lytton Creek wildfire, the importance of us planning together. Hilekw to get ready together, and think of your home. What if that is impacted? Or your neighbor's home, or that neighbor with the municipality or our mainland Coast Salish communities, just to sit with that in a moment and what other steps that you need to do to get ready together to look after that drawing that you have, your home, who's in your home, or who visits your home. So that's something that I've learned along the way, is that it's time to get ready together. And that was many of the heartfelt tears and passion of those that I supported for hundreds of days that survived the Lytton Creek wildfire and many other events that we have in and around the community, in around the home that you have. So with that, has everyone done their drawing and they have their name? And that's just a moment to reflect. So now if everyone could stand up. They're going, oh no, it's a chicken dance or the hokey pokey. No, it's not. Not today. So make sure you have room for your arms. Your arms out, big stretch. Some of you can remember this, right, Ken? So grab your arms and wrap them around yourself. Pat yourself on the back. Give yourself a big hug. Now we'll put those arms back out. And now the opposite arm on top. Pat yourself on the back. Does that feel different? Yeah, it feels really weird, right? But it's time like this. We have the same outcome, hugging ourselves, but we need to do things a little bit different in emergency management. So, and in planning. And looking after your home that you drew, but your neighbors and everyone around us. So with that, I'm really grateful that you're all here. Thank you to your family, friends, and who has pets in the room? I need to know. Okay. But with your hands, how many pets? Oh, I have 5. We probably have more pets in the room that need a place to go than us. So always remember, for planning, I do this all the time, to look after your pets. But with that, I'm all about having fun, and I'm honored to spend some of the time with you today. And that thank you to your family and friends and pets for sharing me to do the work that you did here today. And I'll turn it over to who speaks next. So I hope you had fun, and you can sit down and just remember that drawing, put it up at work when you go back to your office. Cook's Jam, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Diane. We just have a couple of closing comments. So Diane, thank you very much. We wanted to have a moment to celebrate you and the really hard work that you've done today. There was a lot of passion. I saw a couple of challenging moments, people challenging each other on their ideas. And that was really exciting to see, because that's what we wanted to all have here today. So yeah, thank you very much. All I wanted to say was just thank you again for coming. And stand up if we could. I just wanted to say thank you to our LFFC team. So if you could all stand up, people who've been working quite hard. Yeah, and Wendy, yes. Yeah, sorry, it's okay. You can stand up whenever you'd like. LFFC team. Okay, great. Can we get a round of applause for the technical team here? Awesome. I just wanted to give a special mention to Erica, who's really been steering us along. She's our sheepdog, as we say, and also to Mariah over there, who isn't even stopping, who actually got her friend and her brother involved to make this event work. So this is a full hands-on all family event. Awesome. Okay, and one last thing for me is just that what we've been doing today is we've called harvesting. So Mariah first introduced this to me as organ harvesting, but that's apparently not what we're doing. We are harvesting the information and the stuff that you've been putting down on the papers. And so we'll be taking all of that, collating it, and we'll be producing a report and some recommendations and some proposed next steps based on what you've done here today. So it's not just going to go off into space. It's going to come together. We're going to put it into something that we can then send out to you, and you can say yay or nay, and that will hopefully determine the next steps that we take and that you take over the next little while. All right, and I'm going to pass it over to Jason for some closing comments. Thank you.
So again, very briefly, just wanted, as one of the co-chairs, to thank everybody for your time and attention today. There was such good hard work happening at all of the different tables. I had an opportunity to kind of weave in between everybody and get an opportunity to see and listen a little bit to what was going on. Just so impressed by the commitment to sit and work and collaborate and to listen. It's so key. I hope you made a new friend or colleague here today, started to build a relationship. I hope that you'll stay in touch with one another and keep this discussion top of mind as we continue to work our way through these challenging issues. But more importantly, I hope that we keep up a sense of optimism and enthusiasm, the fact that we are all better when we work together on issues like this, especially challenging issues that are facing each of our communities. But based on these principles, again, I hope that you just keep up that optimism and a commitment to hard work, put your shoulder to the wheel and to work together. So thanks very much again for your time today.
Echoing Jason's comment about your time, there's nothing greater than you give us and us trying to build something here as a day of your time. So I really acknowledge that for those in person and those online. Really, it stunned me when Mariah told me there's 58 different local governments, First Nations, and other agencies gathered here today. 58 different groups. So that brings a wealth of experience and a wealth of priorities to the table that I hope when we write up the report, you'll see yourselves reflected in it. And I was thinking over the course of the day, table hopping, you have a really good dialogue. I think there's a pretty clear understanding of most of what it is that we're doing, but maybe we need to work on this reconciliation theme a little bit differently. As I know, quite often when you're not fully cognizant of what the declaration is, you refer to the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, where in this conversation, I speak specifically to Article 29, our right to protect our land and resources. Article 32, our right to achieve free, prior, and informed consent on all developments on our tidal lands. Article 18, our right to be involved in decision-making that potentially affects our rights. And Article 19, that speaks broadly to free, prior, and informed consent. So I'd encourage you to think of it, and there's other related articles, but if we can get those articles to some common ground, a lot of good things will happen. So try to take some fear away from a misunderstanding, misinformation on the unknowing aspect of how it is we're going to apply the declaration. Because first and foremost, none of us are going to write, here's all our declaration standards, take it or leave it. That's not the way we are. We no doubt, I can tell you exactly what I feel about those declarations, but we have to sit down and figure it out together between particularly us and local governments, but then eventually the broader society as well. So really hoping this is a bit of a learning opportunity for you broadly, not only in our principles, but what it is that we're bringing to the table. And think of what it is that we're bringing to the table, particularly around the implementation of the declaration or Supreme Court decisions like Chilliwack, as potential sledgehammers. If we don't have a relation with you, those are going to, free, prior, and informed consent is going to be a pretty big sledgehammer. But if we engage like this, there's no need to bring a hammer to the table. And I use what we're doing at what I call at home between Seabird, Sq'eqyl, Sq'ewqeyl, and Chiam, District of Kent, and Village of Harrison Hot Springs. We've come together for a number of years, and we've got three priorities amongst all of us. The first priority is sediment management in the Fraser to reduce erosion on Seabird and the dikes in the District of Kent. The second priority is a secondary egress out of Harrison Hot Springs because they've only got one way in, one way out, and if it's a fire in between them, they're hooped. And then the third priority is some safety around Highway 1 and Mount Woodside especially. So I raise that to you as an example that we've been working together for so long that we're going in the same direction. So free, prior, and informed consent isn't a sledgehammer or a hammer because we're beyond it, right? And if any of you local governments need a little bit of help developing relations with your local communities, we could play a role in that if needed. We've always had the intention in our community forum to expand it, including more of our communities and more local governments as well. And I think there's real opportunities to learn there because you over the course of the last 3 sessions here, I hope you're getting a deeper understanding where it is we are going to go. We are going there, preferably with you, but we are going there. and looking for that like-minded, that forward-thinking generations ahead on how it is that we make this region more resilient. Really appreciating the minister's comment about being at a place where we're less worried about what Mother Nature is doing in any given date because we're prepared for it. We're best prepared for it. So the intent or the aspirations of what it is that we want to do with Sq'eqeyl, the intent and aspirations of starting with the 5 principles and beyond of the Lower Fraser Floodplain Coalition, you're going to see that playing out more and more. And I'd really encourage you that if you're doing things in your jurisdiction and it aligns with what it is that you've heard, let us know. Because we want to celebrate with you that, you know, we're doing things in a resilient fashion. We're utilizing nature-based solutions. We're being better stewards of what is around us, the environment, the ecosystems, the water, the salmon, and so forth. Because some of these values and principles that we bring forward, you know, we call them values and principles, but in English, they're probably closer to a law than anything else. We've got a saying, a long-standing saying amongst Coast Salish people. Sq'eq'eyl, is when anywhere in your Instalo country, and you're in Instalo country right now, anywhere you look is ours. But when we say it's ours, we have an obligation to look after it. That is the land, that is the water, but that's you as well. A lot of you you're very young governments. You don't have the thousands of years of governance of looking after the land and resources that we do, and you can learn a lot from us. And with the new ways of thinking around technology, responding to climate crisis differently, we have an opportunity to learn as well. So really, that's the bottom line. Let's get there together. That's what Sq'eqeyl is really about, and really appreciate all the brain trust behind the LFFC, because we're bringing some really tremendous people together to support us in that common cause, that common vision as well. So I'm not sure about timing, Erica, about when we get something back to everybody, because we do want to give back to you what it is we've heard and we'll compile it in a way that is constructive, that is strategic, that informs policy. And I would argue, even with EPA modernization underway, what we're talking about here needs to influence and direct and redirect policy and regulation, not now, or sorry, now, not next year. Because but when you have will for change and you describe the change in a way that government understands, they tend to get there a little bit quicker. So again, thank you for your time. I hope this whole discussion resonates with you. And looking forward to future discussions in the future. Hi, chap, CMLCI. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, and I'll invite tselíya, Wendy Ritchie, to do a closing. Thank you.
Well, I really hope your prayers have been answered and your thoughts have all come together. It was a great day today. And I know everybody's tired of sitting and thinking. So take this time to take a few deep breaths and just appreciate Mother Earth. And the story that I told you this morning about the beginning of time, when you hear us say, all my relations, we're humbling ourselves to the four-legged, the finned, the winged, and the rooted. That's why we say all my relations, because we can't survive without them. So we're paying that respect every time we say that term. So I'm going to sing a song and just take some deep breaths and ground yourself. Get ready for your long journey back home and to be with your family for the weekend. I'm singing the Thank You to Mother Earth song. Oh, 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 hey, oh, hey, oh. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, hello, hello. Hey, 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 hey. Oh, Hilekw, Hilekw, Hilekw. Oh, Hilekw, 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 Hilekw. Oh, Hilekw, Hilekw. Hey, 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 hey. Oh, Hilekw, Hilekw, Hilekw. Oh, Hilekw, Hilekw. Hilekw, Hilekw, Hilekw. Oh, Hilekw, Hilekw. Eh, 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 eh. Oh, Hilekw, Hilekw, Hilekw. Yeah, Thank you, everybody. Take care of yourself. All my relations.